Hello everyone, welcome to Frightening Tales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax and dive into tonight's case. Today I told you about murder cases which are unsolved. First, CSE. The Shrouded House. The residents of Villisca, Iowa thought of their little town as a friendly, neighborly place. This illusion was shattered by a single, terrible event. Life in Villisca would never be the same again. On 10/19/12, was a quiet Monday morning in the farming town of Villisca, Iowa. Too quiet, in fact. A woman named Mary Peckham was bustling about doing her chores when she noticed an odd stillness at about 7 a.m. Normally by this time, Mary's neighbors would be bustling, too. Instead, aside from the impatient mooing of cows waiting to be milked in the field, their house was silent. The house next door belonged to the Moore family parents, Josiah B., a businessman known as either JB or Joe, and Sarah, and their four children, 11-year-old Herman, 9-year-old Catherine, 7-year-old Boyd, and 5-year-old Paul. With that many kids, the home was rarely quiet. Worried, Mary called J.B.'s brother Ross, who used his key to get inside. He saw blood and asked her to fetch the town marshal. Bloodbath. Marshal Henry Hank Horton was similarly shaken after walking through the silent house. Somebody murdered in every bed, he muttered as he went to fetch Dr. J. Clark Cooper, the first physician to examine the scene. Inside the house, the entire Moore family had been brutally slain, as had two young friends of the family, Lena and Ina Stillinger. The killer had wielded an axe, using the blade to kill his victims, and then the handle to bludgeon their faces beyond recognition, before covering the heads with bedclothes. The mutilation was so severe that one Iowa newspaper misidentified the Stillinger girls as another pair altogether. The night before the deaths, JB and Sarah were at the local Presbyterian church watching their children perform Children's Day exercises. Lena and Ina also took part, and the two girls aged 11 and 8, respectively, were invited to stay the night at the Moore home. The young guests were in a downstairs bedroom, while the rest of the family was upstairs. Investigators determined Lena and Ina were the first victims and that one of them had awakened, judging by a defensive wound that suggested she'd thrown up an arm to ward off a blow. It's possible that Sarah had also awoken during the attack. One neighbor told police she thought she heard Sarah's voice in the night yelling, "Oh dear! Oh dear! Don't! Don't! Don't!" All the bodies were found in a natural sleeping posture, with heads beaten almost to a pulp. Adams County Free Press, June 15, 1912. It appeared the killer had taken pains to conceal himself. The blinds had been tightly drawn closed on the windows. Glass doors had been covered with articles of clothing. Even the mirrors inside the house had been shrouded. The attack was not a robbery, as no valuables were taken or even disturbed. It seemed that the killer wasn't in a rush. He had taken time to partially clean the murder weapon before leaving it propped against the wall of the downstairs bedroom. The crime scene had some odd elements that still perplex researchers today. One 4-pound slab of bacon was left leaning against the wall next to the axe, while another piece of bacon was found on the piano in the parlor. On the kitchen table was a plate of uneaten food and a bowl of bloody water. It's perhaps noteworthy, too, that Lena's nightgown had been pushed up, leaving her exposed, though doctors determined she had not been sexually assaulted. Murder house callers. The police made a crucial error in failing to immediately secure the crime scene, allowing dozens of people to trample through the murder house. One suspect actually had a portion of skull in his possession that he bragged to several witnesses belonged to JB. However, this man was able to plausibly explain he had simply picked up the piece of bone off the floor as he gawked. The investigators' best guess was that the killer must have been a relative of the family, and early reports tossed out some names: Samuel Moyer, a brother-in-law of JB, and John Van Gilder, a former brother-in-law of Sarah. Townspeople racked their brains for clues and alerted police to every stranger they'd seen or bizarre scenario they'd witnessed. Many of the resulting tips ultimately proved useless. May Van Gilder, the 16-year-old niece of JB and Sarah, said the Saturday before the murder, a stranger asked her where the Moores lived. When the girl later told Sarah of the query, Sarah reportedly replied that someone matching the description had been hanging around the home. That exchange prompted police to arrest a man in blood-stained shoes named Joe Ricks in Monmouth, Illinois. When May traveled to identify him, she said they had the wrong man. Another dead end came when a supposed expert named C.M. Brown reached out to detectives and offered to obtain an image of the killer from the retina of Lena. The theory was that because Lena had awoken, the last sight she saw was the killer, and that image would be imprinted on her retina much like a photograph. Detectives agreed, and Brown said he recovered an image that indicates a man of stout build, very broad shoulders, and extraordinary length between the shoulders and hips. Unsurprisingly, nothing came of it. June 9, 1912 / strangers spotted near the Moore's house. However, some tips were more promising. Cora McCoy, who lived 2 blocks from the Moore house, said she saw 2 strangers walk by at about 3 p.m. on Sunday afternoon, the day before the murders. About 3 p.m. on Sunday afternoon, the day before the murders. The men walked close together, as if talking confidentially. McCoy said she saw them again at dusk. One of them looked like a man named William Blackie Mansfield, a supposed army deserter and cocaine fiend who, 2 years after the Villisca murders, was suspected in the similar acts. Slaying of his wife, daughter, father-in-law, and mother-in-law. Another neighbor of the Moore family, Mary Landers, also saw 2 strange men walking toward their house. She said they paused to look at Moore's axe, which was in a chopping block in the yard. Conspiracy theory. Several witnesses said that they spotted Iowa Senator Frank F. Jones and his son Albert in town at the time of the murders. On the surface, this might seem harmless, but JB had worked for the elder Jones Farming Equipment Company before leaving to start a competing business. Jones was reportedly upset by his departure and by his nabbing of a lucrative John Deere contract. There were also rumors that JB was having an affair with Jones' daughter-in-law, Donna. It all made for bad blood, but was it enough to kill? Local men Fred Fryer, Frank Milehiller, and Vern Robinson all reported seeing JB talking with Sen Jones' son a few hours before the murders. Another man, Jim Bridewell, said he saw Albert Jones with Villisca Pool Hall owner W.B. Bert McCall. Garage owner E.M. Nelson said he spotted McCall behaving suspiciously and in a rush about 9 p.m. the night of the slayings, while several witnesses said McCall had shown them a piece of bone that he said came from J.B.'s skull. These witness statements led to theories that Sen Jones, Albert Jones, Blackie Mansfield, and Burt McCall worked together. A detective named James Wilkerson, who worked for the renowned Burns Detective Agency, was hired to investigate the killings after police came up empty-handed. In 1916 he announced he had solved it, stating that Sen. Jones had hired Mansfield to murder JB for hurting his business. The theory was bolstered by testimony from Alice Willard, a Villisca busybody, recruited by Wilkerson to help investigate the case. Willard said that the night of the murder, she and two other women had driven home from Lincoln, Nebraska, when their car broke down near the Moore house. As she reached the back corner of the Moore lot, she saw 5 men talking in hushed voices. While she couldn't hear much of their conversation, she said she picked out some key words and phrases: money, Sunday, after church, and get Joe first, the rest will be easy. She recognized one of the men as Sen. Jones. 3. Wilkerson's claims were heralded with huge headlines: Great Crime at Villisca is now solved. Read one from Marshalltown, Iowa. The story claimed that Mansfield not only had been hired to kill J.B. Moore, but he also was responsible for the double-axe murders 4 days prior in Paola, Kansas. The allegations against Mansfield were brought before a grand jury, but Mansfield's employer provided records saying he had been in Illinois at the time of the murders. Mansfield was never charged. That didn't stop Ross Moore, J.B.'s brother, or Joe Stilling or Lena and Ina's father, from believing Wilkerson's theory. Serial axe killer? Neither Villisca nor the Paola killings were the only axe murders of the era. There was a string of similar killings throughout the Midwest, many of which were ascribed to Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the Moores of Villisca. Moore was found guilty of the murder of his mother and grandmother in December 1912, and U.S. Department of Justice agent M.W. McClaffery theorized that he could be responsible for as many as 23 more, including the Villisca deaths. McClaffery pointed to similarities beyond the murder weapon. Each victim was slain in their homes with exceptional brutality. In each case, the bloody axe was found nearby. He also noted that the axe murders started in late April 1911 and stopped in mid-December 1912, a window of time during which Henry Moore was out of prison. In their book, The Man from the Train, Bill James and Rachel McCarthy. James claimed that Paul Mueller, a German immigrant farmhand, was a serial killer who traveled by train and killed families with their own axes. The Villisca slaying is one of many killings they pinned on this elusive character. Some townspeople said that they had spotted Mueller shortly before midnight on the night of the murders, and he seemed to be in a rush. After the bodies were discovered, a nationwide manhunt ensued, with Mueller reportedly holing up in Wisconsin, New York, Pennsylvania, and beyond. He was never found. Peeping Tom. One suspect was actually tried for the Villisca deaths. The morning the bodies were found, a reverend by the name of Lynn George Kelly left Villisca by train at about 5:20 a.m. On the train long before the bodies had been discovered, he allegedly told fellow travelers that there were 8 dead souls back in town who had been butchered in their beds. Word of this prompted investigators to take a close look at Kelly, who had arrived in town the morning of the murders and even attended the Children's Day in which the youngsters had performed. 2 weeks after the murders, Kelly returned to Villisca and posed as a detective, joining a tour of the murder house. He inserted himself further into the case by claiming that, at about 1 a.m., he had actually heard the thud of the axe that killed the 8 victims. Kelly had a history of mental illness and related odd behavior. He was schizophrenic, there was no doubt about that, said Ed Epperly, a PhD at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, who studied the case for nearly 40 years. I think the motive was sexual. Epperly points to the uplifted nightgown on one of the victims and draws a parallel between that and Kelly's habit of window peeking. Kelly had also been charged twice with sending obscene materials in the mail, asking young girls to pose nude for him. A town divided. In 1917, a grand jury heard evidence against Kelly and indicted him for the Villisca murders. As he awaited trial, Kelly even signed a confession to the murders, saying God had told him, "Suffer the little children to come unto me and slay utterly." 6. However, Kelly recanted the confession at trial, and the jury deadlocked 11-1 for acquittal. A second jury acquitted Kelly in November 1917. The townsfolk in Villisca were split in their beliefs. Some residents thought Sen. Jones was the culprit, while others were convinced Kelly was the killer. It really tore the community apart, said filmmaker Kelly Rundle, who made a movie about the murders called Villisca, Living with a Mystery. The case has also acquired a supernatural aura. The Villisca house has been investigated by numerous ghost hunters, who claim to have encountered paranormal phenomena, helping to make the building a tourist attraction. Visitors can even stay there overnight. Case notes: the Moore family were prosperous and popular in the area. Lena and Ina were invited to stay with the Moore family because it seemed safer than having them walk home in the dark. J.B. Moore received the most blows of all the victims. Police discovered 2 cigarette butts in the attic, implying that the killer or killers could have waited until the family were asleep before attacking them. About 100 people wandered through the house looking at the bodies before the Villisca National Guard arrived. J.B.'s brother-in-law Samuel Moyer was arrested but discounted because he had an alibi. On the day of the murder, several posses of local people went out looking in barns and outbuildings, hoping to catch the killer. Photography was making rapid advances in the early 20th century. Optography. Obtaining an image from a dead person's retina was thought a serious possibility. Modern forensic science would likely have solved the Villisca case. However, in 1912, even fingerprinting was still new, and law enforcement cooperation across state lines was poor at best. Sen. Jones' career was ruined by the allegations, and he sued Wilkerson for slander. The senator lost the $60,000 defamation lawsuit. After his acquittal, Blackie Mansfield successfully sued the Burns Detective Agency and Wilkerson for $2,250. Some investigators ridiculed Willard's account, because she waited 4 years to share it. She explained she had been too afraid. On June 6, 1912, in Paula, Kansas, Roland Hudson and his wife Anna were murdered while they slept. No motive was discovered, and no one was charged. The authors of The Man from the Train also assert that Mueller could have been responsible for the 1922 Hinterkaifeck murders. Kelly allegedly mailed a bundle of blood-soaked clothing to a laundry soon after the murders. Kelly was the son and grandson of English ministers. Epperly believes Wilkerson's conspiracy theory involving Sen. Jones had led the jury astray. Second case. A Hollywood whodunit. It was a thriller plot fit for the movies. A famous film director mysteriously murdered in his home. For extra glamour, some of the suspects were genuine stars of the silver screen. For extra spice, William Desmond Taylor had a secret past. He name William Desmond Taylor is no longer familiar to modern moviegoers, but in the 1910s and 20s, he was a prolific director whose name routinely appeared in gossip columns alongside that of one beautiful actress or another. He worked with legends of the silent film era, Mary Pickford, Myrtle Steadman, and Wallace Reed, and lived in a stylish bungalow in a sought-after Los Angeles movie colony neighborhood. To his Hollywood friends, William Desmond Taylor seemed to have it made. Such was the case until the morning hours of February 2, 1922, when Taylor's valet and cook, Henry Peavy, found his lifeless body lying face up on the floor of his study. Peavy ran screaming from the bungalow into the apartment building's courtyard. At first, it appeared that the 49-year-old director must have succumbed to natural causes. His suit was unmarked, said a neighbor, the actor Douglas MacLean, who rushed to William's home as soon as he heard Peavy's cries. He was lying flat on his back, his feet separated a little, his hands at his side, perfectly flat on his back, MacLean commented. I said to Mrs. MacLean, later on, he looked just like a dummy in a department store, so perfect, so immaculate. Movie mogul Adolf Zucker, president of famous players Lasky, Hollywood's preeminent studio, was desperate to hush up the potential scandal of Taylor's death. Before the police arrived, he sent employees around to Taylor's house to remove any bootleg liquor or compromising material. They also told Peavy to clean up the crime scene. As soon as the police turned the dead man over, it was obvious that Taylor had not died a natural death. He was lying in a pool of blood, with a bullet wound in his back. From the angle of the wound, the gun had probably been fired by someone standing just over 5 feet, 1.5 meters tall, possibly while embracing Taylor. William Desmond Taylor's murder would become one of Hollywood's darkest legends, with every twist and turn of the investigation lapped up by the press. Gossip peddlers could not have wished for better material. The first suspect. Unfortunately for actress Mabel Normand, the police's inevitable first step was to suspect whoever last saw the victim. Considered one of the top comedians of the era, Mabel had huge, expressive eyes, and dark hair, cropped flapper style. By 1922, she was working for Goldwyn Studios for about $1,000 a week, the equivalent of nearly $15,000 today. She also had a drug and drinking problem, coincidentally, perhaps. Taylor was famously on a crusade to rid Hollywood of drugs. February 1, 1922 / Mabel Normand is the last known person to visit William Desmond Taylor at his home. Normand denied knowing anything about the murder, claiming that her visit was completely innocent. Taylor had bought her a book and called her to pick it up. She arrived between 7 o'clock and 7:15 p.m., they talked about literature and theater, and then, after about half an hour together, he walked her to her car and they waved goodbye. Please tell the public that I know nothing about this terrible happening and that Mr. Taylor and I did not quarrel, she said in a press statement. 2. After being repeatedly questioned, Mabel Normand was dismissed as an official suspect, though a cloud of suspicion remained over her. As an official suspect, though a cloud of suspicion remained over her. As recently as 1990, author Robert Giroux put forth a theory that Williams' determination to help Mabel beat a cocaine addiction angered her drug dealers, and so they killed him in revenge. A teenage crush. Search newspaper mentions of William Desmond Taylor in the months leading up to his death, and nearly every story includes the name of 19-year-old up-and-coming actress Mary Miles Minter. Born Juliette Riley in 1902 in Shreveport, Louisiana, Mary was a doe-eyed beauty in the mold of Mary Pickford, though 10 years younger. Taylor had directed Mary in the 1919 silent film, Anne of Green Gables, in which she played the title role, and he was known to be invested in her career. After his death, investigators found love letters from Mary among Taylor's effects. The notes were written in a silly code known to thousands of youngsters, while one read, "I'd put on something soft and flowing. I'd wake to find two strong arms and two dear lips pressed on mine in a long, sweet kiss." 3. This implied a far more intimate relationship than even Taylor's closest friends had realized. While Mary's mother tried to downplay her daughter's declarations, saying that Mary loved William as a child would her father, for Mary herself said otherwise, referring to him as the love of her life. "I loved him deeply, with all the admiration and respect a young girl gives to a man with his poise and unfailing culture." Mary Miles Minter. Reporters latched onto Mary's romantic revelations, painting her as both virginal and a temptress, a young woman who mistook William's kindness as something more. No evidence surfaced that he ever returned Mary's affection. After his death, rumor was that he was actually gay or bisexual. One typically lurid story in the New York Daily News reported that William engaged in unmanly rituals as part of an opium cult. Taylor and Minter's secret relationship was enough to warrant interrogation. The fact that she had no alibi, and that police believed 3 long blonde hairs found on Taylor's jacket were hers, helped to ensure her name would be forever linked to the case. In 1937, 15 years after the murder, police made it clear that Mary was still a prime suspect. When they subpoenaed her, her mother, and her sister, claiming they had uncovered new evidence, Mary publicly demanded that the authorities should either clear her name or try her for murder. Neither ever happened. Fatal attraction. Nevertheless, Mary has remained a suspect. The writer Charles Hyam suggested in his book, Murder in Hollywood, Solving a Silent Screen Mystery, that Mary was jealous of his affairs with other women and men. 5. Hyam posits that, the night of the killing, Mary turned up at William's home with a gun and threatened to kill herself if he would not return her love. He calmed her down, but she was still holding the gun as they embraced and accidentally shot him. As quickly as Mary Miles Minter's name hit the headlines as a possible suspect, so, too, did her mother's. Charlotte Shelby had been a Shakespearean actress who had appeared on Broadway in at least one production, but her stardom fell as she raised her 2 daughters, Mary and Margaret Fillmore. By some accounts, there was no love lost between Charlotte and William Desmond Taylor. Charlotte's former secretary told a district attorney attached to the case that she heard Charlotte tell Taylor, "If I ever see you hanging around my Mary again, I'll blow your goddamn brains out." The matriarch. The matriarch. On the surface, it would seem ludicrous to think Charlotte would want Taylor dead. He was, after all, shepherding her daughter's career and thus helping the whole family financially. Some commentators posited that Charlotte was merely a protective mother trying to shield her young daughter from a man nearly 3 times her age. Mary herself rebuffed that notion. "Mother's actions over Mr. Taylor's attentions to me were not inspired by a desire to protect me from him. She was really trying to shove me into the background so that she could monopolize his attentions and, if possible, his love." 6. Even more damning were comments and court testimony provided by Charlotte's older daughter, Margaret. According to her, neither Mary nor Charlotte was home between 7 o'clock and 9 p.m. on the night of the murder. Mary eventually arrived in a hysterical condition, while Charlotte did not come home at all. I knew she was out all day and night, hunting for certain men to learn Mary's whereabouts. She later came in and told us that Taylor had died. Margaret told police that her mother had tossed the gun into a river in Kansas City. Soon after, Charlotte had Margaret committed to a psychiatric ward. Beyond the daughter's incriminating statements about Charlotte's possible role in Taylor's death, police uncovered convincing circumstantial evidence against the matriarch. She allegedly owned both the type of gun and the rare, soft-nosed ammunition used in the killing. 7. While this was not enough to convince a grand jury, it was plenty to convince Ed King, one of the lead investigators on the case, who went to his grave believing Charlotte Shelby got away with murder. Double identities. The list of suspects does not end with Charlotte Shelby. Suspicion also surrounds the dead man's chauffeur and his own brother. The roots of this theory lie in Taylor's early life, one he abandoned 14 years before his death. He was born in 1872, not as William Desmond Taylor, but William Cunningham Dean Tanner, the eldest son of a wealthy landowner and the grandson of a British Member of Parliament. William was raised in Mallow, Ireland, with a younger brother named Dennis Gage. Dean Tanner. William longed to become an actor, and disappointed his Dean Tanner. William longed to become an actor, and disappointed his family by refusing to join the British Army, joining a theatre group in Manchester, England, instead. He bounced around the UK and then Canada, before landing in New York City, where Dennis joined him. The two opened an antique store on Fifth Avenue. In 1901, at the age of 29, William married Ethel Harrison, the niece of a real estate tycoon, and the two had a daughter named Ethel Daisy. In 1908, William is said to have emptied his bank account and vanished, leaving no forwarding address for his wife and child. Ethel would eventually learn that her husband had moved to Hollywood when she and her daughter saw him on the silver screen using a new name. 4 years after William disappeared, so did his brother, Dennis, in similar fashion. His wife said he left the house with his hat and walking stick, as though going to work, never to return. Neither his wife nor his two small children ever heard from him again. Sometime in 1920, Taylor hired a man named Edward Sands to be his chauffeur. A year before his murder, he and Sands had a falling out. Taylor accused the chauffeur of stealing from him and threatened to have him arrested. Sands disappeared shortly before the shooting and was sought by police as a potential suspect. This all serves as a backdrop to one of the more convoluted theories surrounding Taylor's death, that Dennis had assumed the identity of Edward Sands and after falling out with his more successful brother, had shot him. This theory even made the newspapers, as evidenced by a 1936 Associated Press story that asked, was the Edward Sands who presumably acted as his valet, really his brother, Dennis, sick? Dennis' abandoned ex-wife, Ada, tried to clear his name, insisting that the brothers were very much devoted to each other and providing police with photos, documents, and handwriting samples. Neither Dennis nor Sands ever resurfaced, however, so the conjecture continues. The Gibson Girl. In 1964, 42 years after the elusive killer struck, a woman named Pat Lewis declared on her deathbed that she had killed William. On its own, this confession would not mean much. Police claimed that the case had garnered some 300 confessions within the first 6 weeks of the Investigation, but a family friend did some digging and found there was perhaps something to Pat Lewis' claims. Lewis had once been known as Patricia Palmer and, before that, had achieved some movie star fame as Margaret Gibby Gibson. By 1964, she was a recluse living in a small house in the Hollywood Hills. When she suffered a heart attack, she demanded a priest and began confessing her sins, namely that while she was a silent screen actress, she had shot and killed William Desmond Taylor. And she continued by saying that they nearly caught her and that she had to flee the country, wrote Raphael F. Long in a piece published by Taylorology, a newsletter dedicated to the murder. Bruce Long, author of William Desmond Taylor, a dossier, hypothesized in the same newsletter that Gibson had, like Mary, fallen in love with William, ultimately killing him in a "if I can't have him, no one can" frenzy. 8. William J. Mann, author of Tinseltown, Murder, Morphine, and Madness at the Dawn of Hollywood, suggests that the actress was trying to blackmail Taylor over the family he had abandoned and had recruited help from local crime boss, Blackie Madsen, and known blackmailer Don Osborne. Mann posits that one of those men, rather than Gibson herself, pulled the trigger. In movies, this compelling mystery would surely have a clear ending. However, it became clear long ago that the murder of William Desmond Taylor will never have a satisfying third act. Case notes: the industry had recently suffered several blows, such as rape and murder charges against comedy star Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle, whose third trial loomed as Taylor lay dead. Robbery clearly was not a motive. Taylor still had $78 in his wallet. A reporter working for the New York Daily News attempted to trick Peavy into confessing to the murder. Mabel Normand had worked alongside legends such as Charlie Chaplin, Harold Lloyd, and the aforementioned Fatty Arbuckle. A locket with Mabel's picture and an inscription "To my dearest" was found in Taylor's belongings. In 1924, Mabel's name was once more linked to a murder. Her chauffeur, R.C. Greer, confessed to shooting wealthy oilman C.S. Dines. In a 1930 interview in the Los Angeles Record, Peavy claimed that Mabel Normand was Taylor's murderer. Mary said she and Taylor had been engaged, a claim that was never corroborated. A pink nightgown found in Taylor's home was reported to have Mary's initials on it. However, this was discredited. Art director George James Hopkins, who went on to have a stellar Hollywood career, was in a relationship with Taylor when he was killed. Both Mary and Margaret would publicly battle their domineering mother in separate court actions years after Taylor's death. Charlotte Shelby created her daughter's stage name by having her take the identity of a deceased cousin, the real Mary Miles Minter. This was to make people believe that Juliet was older, and therefore allowed to work without being in violation of child labor laws. Ethel was granted a divorce on charges of adultery 4 years after William left her. Taylor reconnected with his daughter shortly before his death. She told reporters that her father's letters were filled with mentions of Mary Miles Minter. Taylor's daughter inherited his entire estate, after debts were paid off, totaling nearly $19,000, over $270,000 in US dollars today. Taylor's neighbor, Faith McLean, had said that she saw a man leaving Taylor's home on the night of the murder. Margaret Gibson starred alongside William Desmond Taylor in 4 movies in 1914. No subsequent contact has ever been unequivocally established. In 1923, 21 months after Taylor's murder, Margaret Gibson was arrested for blackmailing a contractor in Burbank. Third case: the bodies in the barn. Few unsolved murders encompass so many dark secrets and raise so many disturbing questions as this lurid, spooky tale of incest, jealousy, and mystery. Interkafek was the name of a small, isolated farmstead situated in the beautiful rolling hills and forests between the towns of Ingolstadt and Schrabenhausen in Bavaria, Germany. It was the home of Andreas Gruber, 63, his wife, Casilia, 72, their widowed daughter, Victoria, Gabriel, 35, and her children, Casilia, 7, and Joseph, 2, and also the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, 44. In the dead of night, on March 31, 1922, someone systematically slaughtered each member of the family one by one and piled their bodies in a barn. The Gruber family. Andreas Gruber was not a popular man in the local community. He was thought to be aggressive and greedy, and people in the nearby village generally avoided him. Victoria was the only child of Andreas and Casilia. To have survived into adulthood, locals speculated that their other children had perished because they were not looked after properly and were treated cruelly. The small children had to stay in the cellar for days, and when you passed by, you could hear the children crying, a neighbor recalled. Even more damaging to Andreas' reputation was the public knowledge that he was having an incestuous relationship with Victoria, whose husband, Carl Gabriel, had died in France in 1914 during World War I. The year after his death, Andreas and Victoria were convicted of incest. Between the years 1907 and 1910, Victoria was sentenced to 1 month, and Andreas to 1 year in prison. It was also rumored that Andreas was the real father of little Joseph and not the village mayor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, with whom Victoria had also been having an intimate relationship at the time she became pregnant. Lorenz had reportedly wanted to marry Victoria, but he had been stopped by Andreas, who had angrily chased him away from the farm with a scythe. Crescensreger. The Gruber's maid before Maria Baumgartner, later told police that she had overheard Andreas telling Victoria that she does not need to marry, because as long as he lives, he is there for this. The maid claimed that by this, Andreas was alluding to the fact that he was there to sexually satisfy his daughter, so she didn't need a husband. 1. Strange goings-on. In the days leading up to the murders, Andreas told neighbors about some odd occurrences that had been unfolding at the farm. A Munich newspaper was discovered on the kitchen windowsill, which the family found peculiar because it was not a local newspaper. When Andreas questioned the postman, Joseph Meyer, about it, he denied that he had delivered the newspaper to anybody in the area. When Andreas looked out at the snow-covered farmland, he noticed footprints leading from the edge of the nearby dark forest to the farm, but none leading back. Was there a trespasser? Was someone watching the family? Crescensreger certainly thought so. While working at the farm, she was so convinced that somebody or something was lurking in the shadows of the forest that, just months before the murders, she packed her bags and fled, never to return. At around the same time, the house keys disappeared from Andreas' desk and somebody attempted to break into the engine yard. Andreas also voiced concerns that livestock was missing and that somebody was creeping around in his attic. Over the course of somebody was creeping around in his attic. Over the course of several nights, he heard strange noises coming from above, but when he went to investigate, he found nothing. His neighbor urged him to go to the police, but Andreas refused, saying, "I know how to defend myself." While these incidents were cause for concern, nobody could have expected what happened next. From April 1, 1922, the entire Gruber family seemed to have vanished. Casilia did not appear at school that day. a Saturday, and the family didn't attend church on Sunday. April 4, 1922. The bodies of the Gruber family are discovered. 3 neighbors decided to investigate. Discovering that all of the doors were locked, they broke into the barn adjoining the farmhouse. Daylight penetrating the murky barn illuminated a ghastly sight: the bludgeoned bodies of Andreas, his wife Kazilia, Victoria, and her daughter Kazilia, piled up among the hay. From the barn, the neighbors were able to enter the farmhouse, where they found the lifeless bodies of the maid, Maria, and little Joseph. The investigation begins. The police concluded that the first 4 victims had been lured one by one to the barn and murdered before they could even cry out. The killer stacked their bodies one on top of the other and partially covered them with hay and an old door that had been dumped in the barn. He then went into the farmhouse, where he killed Joseph, who was asleep in his cot, and Maria. He covered their bodies with clothing and sheets. Each victim had been bludgeoned with a matica pickaxe-like farming tool on the face and head. The elder Kazilia also showed signs of strangulation. While the majority died a quick, albeit vicious, death, the younger Kazilia took several hours to die. The pathologist discovered tufts of her hair tangled in her fingers and in her hands. She had apparently pulled some of it out as she lay dying. The pathologist estimated that the murders took place at around 9:30 p.m. on March 31st. Furthermore, the killer did not immediately flee the grisly scene. He remained at the farm for several days, feeding and milking livestock and helping himself to bread and ham from the pantry. Neighbors later claimed that they had seen smoke coming from the farmhouse chimney. Schrabenhausen police were called in to assist in the investigation, but after realizing that they were in over their heads, the more experienced Munich force took over the case. Their initial theory was that the killer was a vagrant, motivated by the family's considerable wealth. However, a search of the farm indicated that gold coins and jewelry had been untouched, and no belongings or livestock were missing. When police questioned local residents, the name Joseph Bartel came to their attention. Bartel was a serial robber who had once escaped a mental asylum. In 1919, he had robbed the Alder family in the small village of Ebenhausen, about 13 miles, 21 kilometers, from Hinterkaifeck. Many speculated that only a madman like Joseph would have remained at the crime scene, living alongside the bloody bodies of his victims for so many days. However, other than the most tenuous circumstantial evidence, nothing tied him to the crime. Past loves. Mayor Lorenz Schlittenbauer, who had once wanted to marry Victoria and had possibly fathered Joseph, was a prime suspect throughout the investigation. He was one of the 3 neighbors who discovered the bodies, and he lived the closest to Hinterkaifeck farm. He had clashed violently with Andreas over his relationship with Victoria, and had even reported them to the authorities for their incestuous relationship. According to the other neighbors on the scene, Schlittenbauer was also said to have been remarkably unfazed when the Gruber's bodies were discovered, despite the gruesome nature of what they found. Admittedly, this outwardly calm behavior could be attributed to shock. March 30, 1931. Lorenz Schlittenbauer is interrogated about the murders once more. Lorenz Schlittenbauer was interrogated at the crime scene on April 5. Lorenz Schlittenbauer was interrogated at the crime scene on April 5, 1922. At the time of the murders, he claimed he was a happily married man with no motive for killing the entire Gruber family. Nevertheless, even today, Schlittenbauer remains a favorite suspect among the townsfolk of Ingolstadt. Schlittenbauer's family still lives in the town and still has to endure the whispers and speculation that he was the killer. Even though, as his son Alois pointed out, there has never been an indictment. One of the more outlandish suspects was Victoria's ex-husband, Karl Gabriel, who had supposedly died in the trenches in 1914. His body was never actually retrieved, leading the Schrabenhausen chief of police, Ludwig Mixel, to suggest that perhaps Gabriel had not died at all. If he had survived, he could have traveled to Hinterkaifeck and committed the murders, perhaps in revenge for his wife's incestuous affair with her father. However, on December 12, 1923, Karl Gabriel's death was officially confirmed by the Central Prosecution Office for War Losses and War Graves, and he was officially ruled out as a suspect in the case. Other possibilities. Another surprising suspect was the cruel and controlling head of the family, Andreas Gruber himself. Author Adolf Jacob Koppel argued in an article in the Munich newspaper Abendzeitung that the mattock used to kill the victims was handmade by Gruber himself and would have been difficult for an untrained person to wield with such deadly efficiency. 2. However, this theory fails to explain how Andreas could have inflicted such fatal injuries on himself. The devil came to Hinterkaifeck, but he was already there. Adolf Jacob Koppel. 20 years later, in 1941, an elderly neighbor, Crescentia Meyer, made a deathbed confession to her priest, Anton Haber. She stated that made a deathbed confession to her priest, Anton Haber. She stated that her brothers Adolf and Anton Gump were responsible for the Hinterkaifeck murders. She explained that her oldest brother, Adolf, had been in an intimate relationship with Victoria and had been infuriated when he became aware of Victoria and Andreas Gruber's incestuous relationship. According to Crescentia Meyer, Adolf and Anton had killed Victoria and Andreas Gruber, and then dispatched everyone else living at the farm to ensure that there would be no witnesses to reveal their crime. However, it was not until 1952 that police decided to investigate the brothers' possible guilt. By this time, Adolf had been dead for 8 years and Anton was an elderly pensioner who categorically denied any involvement in the murders. He was arrested but, after 3 weeks in custody, released without charge. A dark legacy. The combination of the unexplained footprints in the snow leading from the forest to the farm, and the mysterious sounds apparently coming from the attic, paint a frightening picture of a sadistic intruder hiding in the house and waiting for his moment to strike. This picture continues to fascinate professional and amateur sleuths many decades after the slayings. However, the sheer lack of evidence, incomplete case records, and the deaths of potential witnesses and suspects means that it is doubtful the mystery of the Hinterkaifeck murders will ever be solved. During the chaos of World War II, a significant number of the police files were destroyed. In addition, all 6 of the victims' heads, which had been sent to the Pathology Institute of the University of Munich for analysis, also disappeared. 1 year after the mass murders at Hinterkaifeck, a court order was given for the farmhouse and outbuildings to be demolished. A small marble monument near the original site, along with 6 graves for the family and their maid, is all that now remains to mark the horrors that unfolded all those years ago. Case notes. The postman noticed that the letters he had delivered on Saturday were left untouched. Victoria sang in the church choir, so her absence was particularly noticed. Each of the 6 victims suffered fatal blows to the head. Crescent's replacement, Maria, was murdered on the very first day she started work at Hinterkaifeck farm. The family dog had been tied up in a barn but was unharmed. More than 100 suspects were questioned over the course of the investigation. It was reported that when the neighbors came across the family dog, it took a particular disliking to Schlittenbauer, barking at him the entire time he was in the barn. The most recent questioning on the case took place in 1986. While the heads were in Munich, they were sent to a clairvoyant who claimed that two people had committed the murders. Fourth case. The impossible murder. Was this history-making case a perfect crime meticulously orchestrated by a ruthless mastermind? Or was the prime suspect just another innocent victim? He murder of Julia Wallace, bludgeoned to death in the parlour of her marital home in Liverpool, England on January 20, 1931 is widely regarded as one of the most baffling of all unsolved crimes. This classic locked room murder mystery has fascinated crime writers such as Raymond Chandler and Dorothy L. Sayers, inspired the P.D. James novel The Skull Beneath the Skin, and also been the subject of a television drama, investigative documentaries, and numerous true crime books and articles in the press. The case also made British legal history. It was the first time that a murder conviction was overturned on appeal following a review of the evidence. The happy couple, William Herbert Wallace and his wife, Julia, lived in a small, 3-bedroom terrace on Wolverton Street in the poor district of Enfield, Liverpool. They had been married for 17 years. William had travelled widely as a young man, visiting both India and China. He was forced home by illness and met Julia a couple of years after his return to Britain. William was now an insurance agent with the Prudential Assurance Company, while Julia was an amateur painter and pianist. In fact, both Julia and William were musically gifted, with William being an adept violin player. The couple would often play and sing duets together. Julia was exceptionally intelligent, having studied philosophy and dabbled in chemistry. According to William, their marriage was harmonious, and friends and neighbors would testify that there was nothing to indicate otherwise. Mystery client. On the evening of Monday, January 19, 1931, 52-year-old William Wallace arrived at the Liverpool Central Chess Club for a game. He was handed a message by club captain Samuel Beattie, who had taken a telephone call for Wallace. The caller had identified himself as R.M. Qualtrough and requested that Wallace should come to 25 Menlove Gardens East the following evening at 7:30 p.m. to discuss an insurance deal. "I want to see him particularly," said the voice at the end of the line. The caller said that he couldn't call back because it was his daughter's 21st birthday and he was therefore particularly busy. William took the note and placed it in his pocket, telling Beattie that he didn't know anybody by the name of R.M. Qualtrough, but would visit him tomorrow nevertheless. Times were tough in Depression-era Britain, and Wallace foresaw the possibility of some much-needed money. The following evening, Wallace finished his day's work at the Prudential Assurance Company and returned home, where Julia had dinner waiting. When the couple finished eating, Wallace told her that he had a meeting with a man who could hopefully bring him more insurance business. As Wallace put on his coat, he added that he would be home as soon as possible. 7:06 p.m. William Wallace boards the tram at Lodge Lane. In order to keep his appointment with R.M. Qualtrough, Wallace set off for 25 Menlove Gardens East. He hadn't heard of the address before but knew the general area. During his tram journey, he chatted to the tram inspector, mentioning where he was going. Wallace got off the tram at what he assumed was the appropriate stop and went looking for the address. He found Menlove Gardens north, south, and west, but no Menlove Gardens East. He then asked several people, including a couple of police officers on beat duty, if they knew the street. They all gave the same answer: Menlove Gardens East did not exist. His patience exhausted, Wallace gave up this infuriating wild goose chase and made his way back home, pondering who r.m. Qualtrough. Chase and made his way back home, pondering who r.m. Qualtrough could be and why he had seen fit to send him to a non-existent address. On a cold, dark winter's evening. The body in the parlor. Wallace arrived home only to discover that he was unable to open either his front or back door. Both appeared to be locked from the inside. His next-door neighbors, John and Florence Johnston, saw him looking worried and asked him if he needed any help. He told them that he had been out for several hours and could not get into his home. However, while Mr. and Mrs. Johnston were present, he walked around to the back once again, and this time, the door opened. "It opens now," he murmured to his neighbors. As he entered the house, a ghastly scene met his eyes. Julia was lying in front of the gas fire in the parlor. She had been bludgeoned to death with a heavy object, hit with such force that her skull had been cracked open. "They've finished her, look at her brains," William commented, with a surprising lack of apparent emotion, to Mr. and Mrs. Johnston, who were standing behind him in the doorway. Police soon arrived to assess the scene and make a search of the house and surrounding area. They noted that there was no sign of breaking and entering, leading them to believe that Julia herself must have admitted the killer into the house. A small sum of money had been stolen from an insurance money cash box in the house, but the police deduced that this was a ploy to give the impression that the murder was the result of a robbery gone wrong. The handling of the investigation left much to be desired. While examining the crime scene, officers wandered all over the house, and smudged fingerprints that could have belonged to the killer. Moreover, the pathologist neglected to take the temperature of Julia's body, and therefore an accurate time of death was never determined. The guilty husband. What is known is that the murder was frenzied and brutal. Blood was splattered across the room, indicating that the killer would most likely have blood on his own clothes. In addition, a check of the house's sinks and drains revealed that they had not been used, indicating that the killer left without washing any blood from his clothing or body. Although there was no direct evidence against him, police soon began to question whether William had killed his wife and engineered the phony meeting with the mysterious R.M. Qualtrough to deflect suspicion from himself. They took the fact that William had asked various people for directions as a ploy to establish an alibi for the murder. It transpired that the phone call from R.M. Qualtrough had come from a telephone booth just 400 yards, 366 meters, from the Wallace household. However, Samuel Beattie, who had taken the phone call at the Liverpool Central Chess Club, was adamant that the voice on the other end of the line was not William's. Investigators also questioned why William had claimed that the back door of his home was jammed, but, as soon as other witnesses were present, miraculously opened. Investigators found a raincoat beneath Julia's body. William didn't have a spot of blood on the suit he was wearing, so police speculated that he could have worn the raincoat over his naked body as he carried out the murder to shield himself from blood spatter. While investigators were building a case against William, the balance of evidence was beginning to tilt in his favor. Numerous witnesses placed William on the tram at around 7:06 p.m. that evening, while others claimed to have seen Julia alive at approximately 6:45 p.m. This time frame implied that William would only have had about 20 minutes to murder his wife, clean himself up, dispose of the murder weapon, hide the money that was missing from the cash box, and catch the tram. February 2, 1933 William Herbert Wallace is arrested and charged with the murder of Julia Wallace. William stood trial at Liverpool Assizes. Few more brutal murders can ever have been committed. This elderly, lonely woman literally hacked to death for apparently no reason at all, declared the prosecuting counsel, Edward Hemmard KC. During the trial, William seemed detached and monotone, if not cold, while detailing the events around the horrible murder of a loved one. He took the stand and failed to impress the jury. Why? As an observer of the trial, crime writer F. Tennyson Jesse wrote, "The jury did not like the man, or his manner, which could have been either stoicism or callousness. They did not understand his lack of expression, and they knew it hid something. It could have hidden sorrow or guilt, and they made their choice. All the evidence against William was highly circumstantial and no motive was put forward. Nevertheless, after just an hour of deliberation by the jury, William Herbert Wallace was found guilty of his wife's murder and sentenced to die on the gallows. People of unpleasing personality should be advised never to go into the witness box." Crime writer F. Tennyson Jesse. 1 month later, Wallace became the first man in Britain to have a conviction for murder dismissed on the grounds that it was not supported by the evidence. Wallace was a free man, but was still met with general suspicion. He moved to a bungalow on the River Mersey where, just 2 years later, he died. Some said that stress and a broken heart contributed to his sudden demise. He went to the grave protesting his innocence. Wallace was buried beside his wife. Alternative suspects. So if William Herbert Wallace was not responsible for his wife's murder, then who killed her? In 1984, true crime writer Roger Wilkes speculated in his book Wallace, The Final Verdict that the real murderer of Julia Wallace was Richard Gordon Perry, a former work colleague of Wallace. Another former colleague told police that Wallace had reported Perry for wrongdoing, which led to Perry being fired. In his book, Wilkes claims that Perry wanted revenge on Wallace, so he lured Wallace from his home with the phone call and committed the murder while Wallace was out searching for the non-existent address. While researching the case, Wilkes found a new witness, a retired mechanic named John Parks, who claimed that on the night of Julia Wallace's murder, he had hosed down a car for Perry. While cleaning the car's interior, he came across a blood-stained glove, which Perry quickly snatched away. 3. John Gannon's book The Killing of Julia Wallace named another suspect in the murder, Joseph Caleb Marsden. Gannon theorized that Wallace knew that he did not have long to live and decided that he did not want to spend his final years with his hated wife. According to Gannon, Wallace hired Perry to make the bogus phone call in order to provide Wallace with an ironclad alibi for the time of the murder. However, Gannon contended that neither Wallace nor Perry committed the murder, but Marsden. Gannon asserted that Marsden was about to marry into a wealthy family, but Wallace had discovered that he was having a sexual relationship with Julia. This gave Wallace the opportunity to blackmail Marsden into killing his wife for him. During the initial investigation, however, Marsden's name cropped up as nothing more than an acquaintance of both Wallace and his wife. 4. An unsolvable puzzle. Since 1931, the so-called perfect murder of Julia Wallace has been investigated and re-investigated numerous times. Nevertheless, experts still have contradicting opinions on William Herbert Wallace's guilt. Many wild rumors circulated, from William having an affair with Julia's sister, to Julia being overinsured and killed by William for the money. One of the most imaginative theories in the case is that William was a secret disciple of occultist Aleister Crowley with a drug addiction, who had numerous affairs behind his wife's back. However, no evidence has ever substantiated any of these speculations. The murder of Julia Wallace continues to defy explanation. The crime novelist Raymond Chandler fittingly referred to the case as the nonpareil of all murder mysteries, the impossible murder, because nonpareil of all murder mysteries, the impossible murder, because Wallace couldn't have done it and neither could anyone else. Case notes. Julia claimed to be much younger than she was. She was actually 17 years older than William. The Liverpool Central Chess Club met every Monday and Thursday at Cottle's City Cafe at 24 North John Street. William was known as an enthusiastic chess player rather than a good one, and only qualified for the second-class team. The milk boy came to collect his money from Julia between 6:30 p.m. and 6:45 p.m. 25 Menlove Gardens West resident Katie Mather told Wallace she didn't know anyone named Qualtrough. Anfield was in the grip of a spate of burglaries by the Anfield housebreaker. Some thought he could have been the killer, but no evidence tied him to the slaying. Police found 5 people with the last name Qualtrough in the Liverpool area. All denied contacting the chess club. The milk boy came to collect his money from Julia between 6:30 p.m. and 6:45 p.m. The trial of William Wallace was extremely short, lasting just 4 days. Fifth case. Deep waters. By an extraordinary twist of fate, a human arm expelled by a shark became the first link in a bizarre chain of events involving smuggling, blackmail, and murder. T was a balmy spring afternoon on April 17, 1935. Bert Hobson and his son Ron were fishing from a 12-foot, 3.6 meter, launch off Marlborough Point in Coogee, Sydney, Australia. Dissatisfied with their catch so far, they put out set lines baited with horse mackerel before returning home for the evening. The following morning, they returned to see if their set lines had caught anything profitable. They were surprised to discover a tiger shark measuring a mighty 14 feet 6 inches, 4.42 meters. The shark had been lured to the set line to feast on a smaller shark that had become tangled in it. The Hobsons managed to capture the tiger shark and then sold it to the Coogee Aquarium, which happened to be run by Bert's brother Charlie. The worldwide economic depression of the 1930s had hit Sydney hard, and Charlie Hobson hoped that this exciting addition would attract visitors willing to pay a bit extra to see the impressive shark fed twice a day. The tattooed arm. On the afternoon of April 25, Anzac Day, a holiday honoring veterans. 8 days after the shark had been caught, a grisly discovery surfaced in the shark's tank. Fortunately, only a few people were present when the aquarium's prize attraction started to thrash about, almost as if it was about to jump out of the pool. Moments later, a human arm clearly expelled by the shark was spotted bobbing in the water. While Bert Hobson used a stick to keep this gruesome find close to the side of the tank, in case the huge shark tried to swallow it again, the police were immediately informed and rushed to the scene. To their surprise, the arm appeared to be in a fair state of preservation. Generally, the gastric juices of a shark would digest human flesh within days. However, the Juices of a shark would digest human flesh within days. However, the stress and shock of being captured and put on display may have slowed the shark's digestive processes. A piece of rope was tied around the wrist, and, on the inside forearm, was a tattoo of two sparring boxers. A missing brother. Gradually, theories as to whose arm it was started to build. Some wondered whether the arm had been discarded by a doctor or medical student, while others suggested, rather fancifully, that the arm could have belonged to a man who had committed suicide by plunging into the ocean with his arms tied. Due to decomposition, fingerprinting was no easy task. Medical examiners had to carefully remove skin from the fingers and then slip it over their own gloved digits to lift a print. April 29, 1935 / Edwin Smith contacts police to report that the arm belongs to his missing brother James. Police received their first lead when a man named Edwin Smith recognized the description of the tattoo. Edwin's brother James had been missing since April 7, after telling his wife that he was going on a fishing trip with a companion. James was a 45-year-old, English-born criminal. Police informant, an ex-boxer who lived in the Sydney suburb of Gladesville. Fingerprinting confirmed that the arm did indeed belong to him. It was initially assumed that its discovery was simply evidence of another tragic shark attack, of which there had been 3 in recent months. However, further examination revealed a far more disturbing scenario. It was clear that the arm had not been bitten off by the shark. After all, it had been severed with a knife. The focus of the investigation suddenly shifted to murder. Thanks to Edwin Smith's information, the police at least knew who the arm belonged to. However, they were now faced with arguably the most bizarre case they had ever encountered. In a Wagga Wagga Express article, dated June 15, 1935, detectives freely admitted that they were facing a problem seemingly devised by one of the cleverest killers in the history of Sydney's crime. Shady deals. James Smith had numerous connections with the criminal underworld. And, while looking into his seedy acquaintances, investigators came across the name Reginald Holmes. To many who knew him, Holmes appeared to be a respectable, wealthy businessman and family man who ran a successful boat-building business on the shores of Lavender Bay. However, there was another, hidden side to Holmes' life. Behind the facade of normality, he was involved in various illegal activities, controlling lucrative smuggling and insurance fraud operations from his company, which was strategically situated on the shorefront. Inquiries revealed that Holmes had once hired Smith to collect cocaine, opium, and other contraband dropped overboard by ships coming in from the east. Moreover, investigators discovered that the year before his disappearance, Smith had been using an overinsured yacht owned by Holmes when it mysteriously caught fire and sank. The duo had intended to cash in on the insurance money, but the company concerned became suspicious and refused to pay. Investigators speculated that Smith was shot dead on the shore and his body then dumped in the ocean. They hoped that finding the spent cartridge from the bullet that killed him, as well as identifying the gun that fired it, might lead them to his killer. The beaches from Cronulla to Coogee were painstakingly searched. The shark in the aquarium was also killed, gutted, and examined. However, both of these attempts to find any clues as to how Smith met his end were in vain. Harbor Chase. Initially, Holmes strongly denied any involvement in the bizarre case. But shortly after police questioned him, they received reports of a raving man careening around the harbor in a speedboat with blood streaming down his face. After a lengthy police pursuit, the dazed man was captured and identified as Reginald Holmes. He had a wound on his head, and he claimed that somebody had shot at him. However, the police were skeptical of this story and concluded that Holmes had inflicted the gunshot wound on himself. Either Holmes was trying to cast himself as a victim in the case, or the graze on his head was a failed suicide attempt. Interrogation of Holmes then led investigators to a convicted forger. Interrogation of Holmes then led investigators to a convicted forger named Patrick Brady. Investigators discovered that Smith was last seen drinking and playing cards with Brady at the Hotel Cecil in Cronulla. They also found out that Brady had rented a small cottage called Courtjoy on Talumbi Street in Cronulla. When the cottage was searched, a can of kerosene mixed with blood was found in the pantry. The owner of the cottage noticed that since Brady had rented it, 2 rugs, 2 large mats, a mattress, a metal trunk, and a rope all appeared to be missing. Even more peculiar, the contents of the missing metal trunk had been placed inside a new, larger one that was found in its place. The owner also noted that the cottage had been scrupulously cleaned. Impressed by this accumulation of clues, the police questioned Patrick Brady, and a few days later, they charged him with the murder of James Smith. June 12, 1935. Reginald Holmes, the key witness in Patrick Brady's murder trial, is found shot dead in his car. Reginald Holmes was scheduled to appear at the coroner's inquiry, as well as the much-anticipated trial of Brady. However, Holmes would not live long enough to give his testimony. In the early hours of the very morning of the coroner's inquiry, Holmes was found shot dead in his car on Hickson Road, Dawes Point, near Sydney Harbour Bridge. This desolate, run-down area was somewhere that law-abiding citizens tended to avoid. It was reputed to be a favorite meeting point for local smugglers, a place where money and contraband speedily changed hands. The passenger door of Holmes' Nash sedan was ajar, and the position of his wounds indicated that he had been shot 3 times by someone sitting in the passenger seat. Moreover, there were no signs of a struggle, implying that Holmes had been murdered by somebody he knew well enough to allow into his car. Mrs. Holmes. Following Holmes' murder, his wife came forward to divulge what she knew, and in lieu of her murdered husband, became the key witness in the trial. She said that on April 8, Patrick Brady had visited their home. His arms were cut and bloody, and he carried a knapsack that she recognized as belonging to Smith. A taxi driver would later corroborate her story, telling investigators that, on that same date, he had driven Brady from Cronulla to Holmes' home in North Sydney. After Brady left, Holmes told his wife that Brady had murdered Smith, dismembered him, and put it in a tin trunk, put it in a boat, and tipped it overboard. 1. He had a hand in a pocket and wouldn't take it out. It was clear he was frightened. A taxi driver testifies at the trial of Patrick Brady. A majority of the detectives in the Sydney Homicide Squad believed that Brady somehow forgot about Smith's telltale tattooed arm when packing the trunk with the rest of his dismembered remains. Realizing his mistake, he later disposed of it, whereupon it was swallowed by the shark. Others theorized that Brady had retained Smith's arm as evidence in order to convince Holmes that the gruesome deed had been done before disposing of it. Rejected testimony. The Supreme Court ruled that an arm did not constitute a body, which was required for a murder conviction, and thus there was no way of knowing if James Smith was deceased or not. The judge also refused to accept Mrs. Holmes' testimony, regarding it only as hearsay. September 12, 1935 / Patrick Brady is formally acquitted of the murder of Reginald Holmes. The generally accepted theory is that when the insurance company refused to pay out after the suspicious sinking of Holmes' yacht, Smith and Holmes fell out, and Smith threatened to expose Holmes as a criminal. James Smith's wife testified that she found an entry in her husband's black pocketbook that Reginald Holmes had owed him £60 or £65, $5,300 or $5,800 in US dollars today. She said she could not be sure how the debt was incurred. However, it is possible that this was the amount Holmes owed Smith for the boat insurance scheme that went awry. In a bid to save his reputation, Holmes hired Brady to put Smith away for good, and Brady shot Smith dead in his rented cottage. When investigators later questioned Holmes, Brady believed that Holmes would not stand up to the pressure, so he silenced him. An intriguing alternative theory about Holmes' death was put forward by Alex Cassels in his 1995 book, The Shark Arm Murders. Cassels speculated that the outwardly respectable Holmes could have taken out a contract on his own life in order to spare his family the public shame they would have suffered if he were to be convicted of the boat insurance fraud. 2. Alex Cassels also suggested another possible suspect for the murders of Smith and Holmes. Smith had been a police informant and had pointed the finger at a Sydney gangster named Eddie Wayman in a bank robbery. Wayman was also mixed up in the local drug trade, and it is possible that Wayman killed Smith and Holmes out of revenge, and to remove rivals in the drug trade. Exposing the truth. Whoever threw James Smith's dismembered arm to the sharks and silenced Reginald Holmes has never been brought to justice. Had the trial of Patrick Brady taken place in modern times, the outcome could well have been very different. In the past, murder convictions without a body were rare, but modern developments in forensic science have made it much more likely that a conviction can be obtained today. A famous example is the conviction of Richard Crafts, who murdered his wife in Connecticut in 1986 and disposed of her body using a wood chipper. DNA technology in criminal investigation would probably have resulted in Brady being found guilty. Investigation would probably have resulted in Brady being found guilty, with or without the rest of Smith's body. As it was a 1,000,000 to 1 chance that the murder of James Smith was ever brought to light, triggering a chain of events that even the most ingenious thriller writer would have difficulty conceiving. Case notes. It was thought that the arm had actually been swallowed by the smaller shark that the tiger shark had eaten. James Smith had been missing for more than 3 weeks. Patrick Brady had several aliases, including Mr. Williams, Mr. Anderson, and Mr. Evans. On the night of Reginald Holmes' murder, a man fishing off Dawes Point claimed he heard 3 shots at around 9 o'clock or 10 p.m. 48 witnesses were subpoenaed for the murder trial of Patrick Brady. The notoriety of the shark arm case blighted Patrick Brady's life. He died in 1965, aged 71. In 1954, somebody attempted to kill James Smith's son, Raymond Smith, with a car bomb. Fortunately, no one was in the car when the bomb exploded. 6th case. Panic in the City. Who was the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run? This serial killer led one of the US premier detectives in a gruesome dance, and terrified the citizens of Cleveland for 4 bloody years. Floating down the river, chunk by chunk by chunk. Arms and legs and torsos, hunk by hunk by hunk. 1. If you're from Cleveland, then there's a good chance that you have heard this 1930s ditty. The eerie lyrics refer to the Cleveland torso murderer. This shadowy individual was exceptionally brutal. decapitating, dismembering, and sexually mutilating his victims, many of whom were still alive when he inflicted these gruesome acts upon them. The butcher would then litter Kingsbury Run, a shanty town in a creek bed running from East 90th Street and Kinsman Road to the Cuyahoga River with their discarded limbs, ready to be found by unsuspecting passers-by. This story unfolded on the calm shores of Euclid Beach in Bracknell, Ohio, on September 5, 1934. Frank Legasel was gathering wood when he made a grisly discovery that he initially mistook for a log bobbing. Along with the flow of the murky water was the decomposed torso of a woman. Her head, arms, and legs below the knee were missing. The body had been treated with some kind of chemical preservative in an attempt to delay decomposition. Although never officially confirmed, she is generally accepted as the first victim of the Cleveland torso murderer. It would not be until the following year that Cleveland police realized that this macabre find was no isolated incident. There was a serial killer in their midst. Terrible discoveries. The date was September 23, 1935, and Cleveland was swarming with worshippers gathering for the National Eucharistic Congress. While playing softball in a ravine in Kingsbury Run, just at the foot of Jackass Hill, two boys stumbled across the bodies of two men who had been decapitated and emasculated. One was identified via fingerprints as Edward Andrassi, 28, a petty criminal from Cleveland's West Side. He had rope burns around his wrists, presumably from being bound by his killer. The other man, who was stocky and middle-aged, was never identified but appeared to have been killed several weeks before. Andrassi. Disturbingly, the professional-looking decapitations were not carried out post-mortem, but were the cause of death for both men. 1934/Safety Director Elliot Ness is transferred to Cleveland. The famed Prohibition agent Elliot Ness was currently Cleveland's Safety Director, with a remit to clean up the city's notorious organized crime networks. However, a very different kind of criminal was now in Cleveland, and Ness was determined to catch him. 4 months later, a barking dog drew attention to two half-bushel baskets covered with burlap bags discarded behind Hart Manufacturing, just off East 20th Street. Stuffed inside the baskets were the lower half of a female torso, 2 thighs, a right arm, and a hand. The rest of her remains apart from her head were discovered the following week in a vacant lot a couple of blocks away on Orange Avenue. The cause of death was decapitation. Her head had been severed between the third and fourth cervical vertebrae with one swift stroke. Fingerprints enabled investigators to identify the body as Florence Palillo, a 42-year-old barmaid and prostitute from the Kingsbury Run area. This was the last of the butcher's 13 victims that investigators would successfully identify. Victim number 5 was discovered in June 1936. This time, 2 boys were skipping school when they happened upon a pair of pants rolled into a ball lying near train tracks in Kingsbury Run. Hoping to find money in the pockets, they prodded the object with a fishing rod. 2. We took a fishing pole and poked the bundle and out pops a head. The boy who found the 5th victim. Investigators found a nude male body around 300 yards, 274 meters away, in front of the Nickel Plate Road Police Building. Much like his male predecessors, the victim had been emasculated and decapitated. Investigators anticipated that this victim would be easy to identify owing to the fact that he had a number of tattoos, including a dove on his arm, with the names Helen Paul inscribed above it. However, despite these distinctive markings and a death mask being placed on display at the subsequent Great Lakes Exposition, his identity was never discovered. The killings continue. A pattern was beginning to emerge: decapitation, dismemberment, and sexual mutilation, all skillfully performed. As investigators sought the brutal killer, the bodies continued to pile up. In mid-July, another victim was found in a valley similar to Kingsbury Run on the west side of the city. He had been decapitated and emasculated. The head was found 10 feet, 3 meters, away alongside a bundle of bloody clothing. The substantial amount of blood on the ground indicated that, unlike previous victims, this man had been killed on the spot. In September, remains of a seventh victim were discovered in a stagnant creek in Kingsbury Run. Near his body was a blood-stained shirt wrapped in a newspaper. The creek was dragged by divers until the lower halves of his legs were found. He, too, had been emasculated. His head was never recovered. Gruesome discoveries. The year 1937 brought a spate of new bodies. On February 23, the upper part of a young woman's torso was found on Lake Erie's rocky eastern shore. Unlike those before her, she had been decapitated post-mortem. The lower half of her torso washed ashore 3 months later. Bones and a skull were all that remained of victim number 9, who was found on June 6. They were unearthed beneath the Lorraine Carnegie Bridge, less than a mile from Kingsbury Run. Analysis of the bones revealed that they were those of an African-American woman who had been dead about a year. As the news spread throughout the city, a man claimed that the remains were those of his mother, Rose Wallace, who had disappeared 10 months earlier. However, this was never officially confirmed. Investigators did not have to wait long for yet another body to appear. On July 6, the lower half of a man's torso was found floating in the Cuyahoga River. A burlap sack containing his upper torso was retrieved. Later, this victim had been sliced open, gutted, and had his heart ripped out. There was a respite until April of the following year, when a young laborer saw something floating near a sewer outlet flowing into the Cuyahoga River. At first glance, he thought it was a dead fish, but on closer inspection, he realized it was the lower half of a woman's leg. In the coming weeks, a lung, a knot of intestines, and a thigh would be found in the river, along with 2 burlap sacks, one of which contained 2 halves of a torso. Frustratingly, the second sack, which may have contained the head, sank without a trace. Ness takes action. Despite Elliot Ness and the Cleveland police's best efforts, they came no closer to catching the mad butcher of Kingsbury Run. They followed a profusion of leads, but every tip and search proved fruitless. August 16, 1938 / the bodies of the final 2 victims, a man and a woman, are discovered. The final 2 victims were found on a landfill at East 9th and Lakeside. A female torso was wrapped in a man's blazer and then wrapped again in an old quilt. A nearby box containing the legs, arms, and head was wrapped in brown butcher paper. As investigators trudged among the garbage, they came across the remains of a male body in a more advanced state of decomposition than the woman found nearby. His head was found in a can. The landfill was in full view of Elliot Ness' office window, almost as if the killer was taunting the director. 2 days later, Ness raided the shanty town of Kingsbury Run, demanding that it be set alight and burned to the ground. Many residents left homeless were rounded up and arrested, as Ness presumed that the killer lived a transient lifestyle like his victims without any evidence to back up this theory. According to him, the arrests were for the people's own protection, and also to collect fingerprints, making potential future victims easier to identify. At a time when unemployment and homelessness were rife, Ness was highly criticized for these extreme tactics. Nevertheless, following the destruction of Kingsbury Run, the killings finally stopped. Who is the butcher? The Cleveland torso murderer's skill with a knife led to speculation that he must have extensive knowledge of human anatomy. Coroner Dr. Samuel Gerber posited that the killer could be a doctor, medical student, male nurse, an orderly, a butcher, hunter, or veterinary surgeon. 3. An article in the Cleveland News in 1936 described the killer as someone who kills for the thrill of killing. He kills to satisfy a bestial, sadistic lust for blood. He kills to prove himself strong. He kills to feed his sex-perverted brain, the sight of a beheaded human. He must kill for decapitation is his drug, to be taken in closer spaced doses. Investigators trawled through the city in search of the killer's workshop. Yes, he will kill again. He is, of course, insane. Cleveland News, 1936. Despite the large number of people interviewed in connection with the case, the investigation came up with just one main suspect. In August 1939, the police arrested Frank Dolezal, a 52-year-old Slavic immigrant bricklayer who frequented the same downtown bar as the victims Palilo and Andrassi. A thorough search of his apartment turned up stains that investigators claimed were human blood, findings that seemed to clinch the case. Dolezal was questioned unrelentingly for 2 days, at the end of which he supposedly confessed to the murders. However, other than circumstantial evidence, there was little to tie Dolezal to the slayings, and it did not take long for the case against him to start unraveling. There were also several discrepancies in Dolezal's so-called confession. He offered to direct investigators to the missing body parts, but led them on a fruitless search. In addition, the supposedly incriminating bloodstains found in his bathroom turned out to be from an animal. Dolezal then recanted his confession, claiming that the police had beaten it out of him. Before being brought to trial, the unfortunate Dolezal was found hanging dead in his cell. The ensuing autopsy revealed bruises and 6 broken ribs, all of which were inflicted while in the custody of Sheriff Martin O'Donnell. Today, it is generally believed that Frank Dolezal was innocent of the Cleveland torso murders. The secret suspect. In 1938, Elliot Ness had another suspect who was never publicly identified. During Ness' grueling interrogation, this suspect was locked in a hotel room for 2 weeks, a clear violation of civil liberties. In his book, In the Wake of the Butcher, James Badal named this secret suspect as Dr. Francis Sweeney, a Cleveland physician and veteran of World War I. During his time in the Army, Sweeney served as part of a medical unit that conducted work including amputations on the battlefield. In 1934, a vagrant named Emil Fronek told police that he had escaped from a doctor who he believed to be the Cleveland killer. He recounted that a man who looked like a doctor offered him a meal at his home. He agreed and followed the man to a house in Kingsbury Run. Once inside, the doctor brought out the finest handout I was ever offered. However, after scarfing down the meal, Fronek became nauseated and fearful. After scarfing down the meal, Fronek became nauseated and fearful. When the man went into the kitchen allegedly to get a whiskey, Fronek staggered outside and hid. He relayed his story to another vagrant, who also said that he almost got cut up in that house, too. Unfortunately, Fronek was later unable to identify the house in Kingsbury Run where these events supposedly took place. Drunk and abusive. Francis Sweeney had lived a turbulent life. He was in and out of the probate court system and was an alcoholic. In fact, it was said that when Sweeney was apprehended by Ness, it took him 2 days to sober up enough to be able to cooperate. In 1934, Sweeney's wife divorced him on the grounds that he had become increasingly abusive and violent toward both her and their children. She said that he would disappear for days and hallucinate while under the influence of alcohol, causing her to fear for her safety and her husband's sanity. 9 days after the final victim was discovered, Sweeney committed himself to the Soldiers and Sailors home in Sandusky, Ohio, where he was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia. In the mid-1950s, Eliot Ness received several taunting postcards, supposedly from Sweeney. In 2003, there was an attempt to retrieve DNA from the postage stamps on the letters, which were in possession of the Western Reserve Historical Society. Unfortunately, it was decided that this would cause too much irreparable damage to the items, and the DNA test was never carried out. In 1939, Cleveland police had also received a letter which was reportedly from the Cleveland torso murderer. It read, "Chief of Police Motowitz. You can rest easy now, as I have come to sunny California for the winter. I felt bad operating on those people, but science must advance. I shall astound the medical profession, a man with only a DC. What did their lives mean in comparison to hundreds of sick and disease-twisted bodies? Just laboratory guinea pigs found on any public street. No one missed them when I failed. My last case was successful. I now know the feeling of Pasteur, Thoreau, and other pioneers. Right now I have a volunteer who will absolutely prove my theory. They call me mad and a butcher, but the truth will out. I have failed but once here. The body has not been found and never will be, but the head, minus the features, is buried on Century Boulevard, between Western and Crenshaw. I feel it is my duty to dispose of the bodies as I do. It is God's will not to let them suffer." X. Legend of a Killer. The Cleveland torso murders caused widespread panic among the city's rapidly growing population. Despite the frantic search for the killer, his identity remains a mystery, as does the identity of most of his unfortunate victims. The torso murders is still the most gruesome and notorious crime spree in the city's history. Today, Haunted Cleveland ghost tours even offer a torso murder tour, in which they tour the landmark sites of the murders and retrace the steps of the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Case notes: the identity of the first victim was never discovered, and she was dubbed the Lady of the Lake. A 1937 St. Louis Post-Dispatch article described Edward Andrassy as an undesirable. Eliot Ness had successfully led an operation against Al Capone and other Chicago mobsters. Between 1925 and 1940, several bodies eerily similar to those of the Cleveland victims were found in an area known as Murder Swamp in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. In 1950, 41-year-old Robert Robertson was found partially decapitated in Cleveland. Some theorized that he was another victim of the Cleveland torso murderer. The police sent out advertisements in 44 languages, encouraging people to report any discovery of large quantities of blood. It was later suggested that there could have been multiple killers, and that a lack of DNA testing and experience in handling such a case led investigators to attribute the slayings to one person. 7th case. Scandal in Shangri-La. while most Britons were suffering the perils and privations of World War II, far away in Africa, a few wealthy aristocrats were living the high life. Until murder shattered their exotic idyll. The murder of Jocelyn Hay, 22. N.D. Earl of Errol, Baron of Kilmarnock, and High Constable of Scotland, scandalized wartime Britain by exposing the decadent habits of a group of wealthy expatriates in colonial Kenya. Speculation was also rife as to the murderer's possible motive. Was it a crime of passion prompted by Hay's notorious womanizing, or could his death have been a political assassination provoked by his fascist connections? Hay was part of a small group of privileged white Britons sitting out the war by living a life of hedonism and luxury in Kenya. The group was known as the Happy Valley Set, and the White Highlands of Kenya was their playground. The Happy Valley Set became infamous for their debauched lifestyles, their sexual promiscuity, excessive drinking and drug use, and continuous partying shocked the small community of settlers who were striving to create farmland from the African bush. Wild parties. Hay first arrived in Kenya in 1924 with his wife, Lady Adina Sackville, with whom he had eloped while she was still married to her first husband. Hay barely pretended to be faithful, but Adina reportedly did not mind the numerous love affairs her husband was having behind her back. Adina was only happy if all her guests had swapped partners, wives or husbands by nightfall, wrote James Fox in his celebrated book on the Happy Valley case, White Mischief. In fact, the couple's dinner parties at their ranch house, Clouds, were the talk of the area. A regular event at these gaudy soirees was the sheet game, in which nude men lined up behind a sheet. The female guests then attempted to identify them just by their lower regions. In 1928, the couple divorced amid fights over financial issues. Hay moved in with Edith Maud Molly Ramsey Hill, a married woman some years Hay's senior. When Ramsey Hill's husband was made privy to the affair, he confronted the couple and chased Hay with a rhino whip. Molly was soon divorced, and she and Hay wed in 1930. After leaving her husband, Molly bankrolled both her and her younger husband. They lived in Osirian, a flashy, Moroccan-style home on the shores of Lake Naivasha, Kenya. Hay's chiseled looks, arrogant air, and quick wit made him irresistibly attractive to the clique of bored, upper-class settlers' wives. A serial philanderer and gambler, his speciality was seducing rich married women. Meanwhile, Molly Ramsey Hill so immersed herself in the alcohol and drug-fueled Happy Valley lifestyle that she died of overindulgence in 1939. Instant attraction. The following year, Hay encountered Lady Diana Delves Broughton, a voluptuous 26-year-old with deep blue eyes and wispy blonde locks. Many women in the Happy Valley set envied her beauty and instant sex appeal. Lady Diana had recently married the much older Sir Jock Delves Broughton, 11th Baronet DL and the largest landowner in Kenya. Recently divorced, Sir Jock had decided to take his young wife to Kenya to escape his mounting debts, as well as to get away from wartime Britain. The attraction between the rakish aristocrat Hay and Lady Diana was instant. They soon embarked upon a passionate and highly visible affair, which Sir Jock was said to be very nonchalant about. When he and Diana married, they had reportedly made a pact that they would set each other free should either one of them fall in love with somebody else. Sir Jock later claimed that he took a philosophical view of his beautiful young wife's affair with his friend and resolved to step back. 2. As if to demonstrate that he bore the couple no ill will, on January 23, 1941, Sir Jock invited Lady Diana and Hay to a dinner party at the Exclusive Muthiga Club, a frequent haunt of the Happy Valley set, along with several other friends. During this lavish event, Sir Jock, though drinking heavily, played the perfect part of a graceful loser. He even toasted the new couple with champagne and wished them every happiness. Within hours, Hay would be dead. Covered tracks. As the dinner party reached its drunken conclusion, Hay and Lady Diana decided to continue celebrating and went out dancing. At around 2:15 a.m., Hay dropped off Lady Diana at the home she shared with Sir Jock, and climbed back into his Buick to drive the short distance to his own house. Scarcely an hour later, 2 dairy workers discovered his body. His car's headlights were still blazing. January 24, 1941. Hay is found shot dead in his car at the Karen Road junction on the Nairobi and Ngong Road. Hay's body was in a kneeling position in the front passenger footwell. A bullet had entered his head just behind the right ear. Powder marks on the side of his face indicated that he had been shot at close range. In the car, police found a cigarette butt soaked in blood. In what remains arguably one of the most bungled police inspections in criminal history, Hay's body was removed before being carefully examined, and police trampled all over another set of tire tracks that could have had a bearing on the case. Hay's Buick was even given a thorough wash before the decision was made to dust it for fingerprints. The murder of Jocelyn Hay, the 22nd Earl of Errol, marked open season on his reputation, and stories of his hedonistic lifestyle flashed across British newspapers alongside news of the nightly raids by German bombers. He quickly became a symbol of debauched aristocracy and, eager for distraction from the Blitz, the nation reveled in his downfall. Before long, his affair with Lady Diana became common knowledge, and Sir Jock was named the prime suspect in the murder. He was duly arrested on March 10 and charged with Hay's murder. Sir Jock denied any involvement in the crime, citing the fact that he had invited Hay and Lady Diana to his dinner party the evening before the murder as evidence that he was not jealous or angry about the breakdown of his marriage. May 26, 1941. The trial of Sir Jock Delves Broughton for the murder of Jocelyn Hay, 22nd Earl of Errol, begins. During the subsequent trial, Lady Carberry, a close friend of the Broughtons, testified that, despite his protestations, Sir Jock appeared unhappy during the dinner party. He told her that he planned to give his wife his estate or make her an allowance. He also announced that he had been extraordinarily lonely during his short marriage. For Lady Carberry added that, after the death of Hay, on one occasion she and Sir Jock had lunch, during which he broke down and wept. The case collapses. So far, the evidence against Sir Jock was little more than supposition. The prosecution claimed that the blood-stained cigarette butt found in Hay's car constituted evidence that Sir Jock was the murderer, on the slender basis that Hay did not smoke, but Sir Jock was known to smoke 2 brands of cigarettes. Searching for hard facts, the prosecution pinned its hopes on showing that the single bullet that killed Hay came from a .32 Colt found in Sir Jock's home. When a ballistics expert testified that the bullet that killed Hay could not have come from a Colt, any Colt, the absence of a murder weapon destroyed the prosecution's case. After just 3 hours deliberation, Sir Jock was acquitted. A contributing factor to this verdict may have been the fact that the foreman of the jury was Sir Jock's barber. Far from being welcomed back after his ordeal, Sir Jock was shunned by his former Happy Valley friends. Lady Diana, apparently recovering quickly from the shock of Hay's murder, immediately left Sir Jock for Gilbert Colville, a millionaire cattle rancher who lived nearby. Nursing a Back injury, Sir Jock returned home to England alone and stayed in the Adelphi Hotel in Liverpool. December 5, 1942 / Sir Jock Delves Broughton commits suicide with a morphine overdose. To many observers, Sir Jock's suicide was tantamount to an admission of guilt. A month after Sir Jock's death, Lady Diana married the eminently respectable Gilbert Colville. In her 2003 book Elspeth Huxley, a biography, C.S. Nichols, an authority on colonial Kenya, named Sir Jock as the murderer. By her account, Sir Jock lay in wait for Hay when he drove Lady Diana home. He got in Hay's car, shot him, and then drove to the crossroads. For a large sum of money, Sir Jock had arranged for an acquaintance, Dr. Athan Phillip, to meet him there and drive him back to his house. Political motives. The theory that Hay may have been killed by a jealous husband was one thing, but when Sir Jock was acquitted, speculation arose that there could have been a political motive for the murder. Could Hay have been assassinated by a British agent because he was a fascist sympathizer, suspected of collaborating with the Germans? Hay had actually joined the British Union of Fascists for a year in 1934, there were even rumors that he was involved in a renegade group that included the Duke of Windsor and Rudolf Hess. 5. An investigation by the Sunday Times speculated that Hay had abused his position as second in command of the Kenyan armed forces by selling secrets to Mussolini's forces in Italian East Africa. It was well known that British military plans had been leaked to the Italian army headquarters in Addis Ababa. Could Hay have been responsible? Giving more weight to this theory, several close associates of Lady Diana alleged that Hay was lined up to become the governor of Kenya in the event of a successful Italian invasion. A lover's revenge. Other commentators have suggested the possibility that a scorned lover did the deed. There are even some who believe that Hay was killed by Lady Diana when he refused to marry her. However, as their passionate romance was still in its first flush, and she was apparently at home in bed at the time of his death, this was thought unlikely. In 2010, a fresh suspect was brought to light when Paul Spicer began researching the American heiress Countess Alice de Jans, who had been a close friend of his mother and a leading member of the Happy Valley set. In his book, The Temptress, The Scandalous Life of Alice, Countess de Jans, Spicer related that Alice de Jans had an on-off relationship with Hay over the course of several years. Coincidentally, she had experience with a gun, having shot her lover, the English nobleman and playboy Raymond de Trafford, and then herself at a Paris railroad station in 1927. Both fortunately survived, and Alice de Jans was dubbed the fastest gun in the Gare du Nord. The femme fatale. Alice de Jans only received a 6-month suspended sentence for shooting Raymond de Trafford and herself. The French court viewed the crime leniently as a crime of passion. Spicer claimed that de Jans had an issue with rejection and suggested that, incensed by Hay's budding relationship with the much younger Lady Diana Broughton, she could have arranged to meet Hay at the crossroads and shot him. She had the motive and she certainly had the nerve. She would not fear carrying out that act. She was consumed with jealousy. Soon after the murder, Alice de Jans visited the mortuary where Hay's body lay and kissed him on the lips, reportedly exclaiming, "Now you are mine forever." She had shot a man before. Author Paul Spicer, concerning Alice de Jans. Alice de Jans had dabbled in the occult and may have hoped to be reunited with her former lover in some form of afterlife. In any event, she never got over his death and committed suicide in September 1941. Spicer claimed that she left a note for the police in which she confessed to the murder. However, the contents of this letter have never been revealed. The glare of publicity surrounding the murder of Hay marked the beginning of the end for Kenya's colonial expat elite, but the question of who pulled the fateful trigger that dark night, and why, continues to cast its lurid, glamorous spell. Case notes: James Fox's book was adapted into a 1987 film, also called White Mischief, starring Charles Dance as Hay, Greta Scacchi as Lady Diana, and Joss Ackland as Sir Jock. Hay's shady reputation dated back to his youth. In 1916, he was expelled from Eton for undisclosed reasons. Shortly before Sir Jock divorced his first wife in 1939, he had been suspected of an insurance fraud over the theft of some paintings and jewelry. Lady Diana was 30 years younger than her husband. Lady Diana and Sir Jock were married for just 12 months. Lady Diana and Gilbert Colville divorced amicably in 1955 and she married Lord Tom Delamere. She died, aged 76, on September 3, 1987. Sir Jock killed himself just days after arriving in England. The British Union of Fascists, led by Oswald Mosley, was banned in 1940 by the British government following the outbreak of World War II. Alice de Jans was fined just 100 francs, about $18 in US dollars, by the French court for shooting her lover and herself. Alice de Jans committed suicide just 7 months after Hay's murder. 8th case. The skeleton in the wood. Was she a German spy, the victim of a black magic ritual, or an unfortunate vagrant? Who Bella really was is just one of this murder mysteries' unanswered riddles. More than 75 years have passed since a woman's skeleton was found stuffed inside a WYCH elm in a park in Worcestershire, England, during World War II. Following this grim discovery, cryptic graffiti asking the question who put Bella in the WYCH elm started to appear around the district. Bizarre theories of German spies and witchcraft rituals keep this local legend alive, and the strange and sinister tale of Bella still captivates armchair detectives today. Despite a lengthy police investigation and a plethora of plausible and not so plausible theories, the identities of the woman nicknamed Bella, and that of her killer, remain a mystery. Down in the woods. The story of the case begins in fittingly dramatic fashion. As dusk was falling on April 18, 1943, 4 teenage boys were cautiously trudging through Hagley Woods. This stretch of woodland was situated on the grounds of the impressive Hagley Hall estate, which belonged to Lord Cobham. The 4 boys, Bob Hart, Tom Willits, Fred Payne, and Bob Farmer, were trespassing. Braving the dangers of getting caught by an angry gamekeeper, they were looking for some excitement to take their minds off the nightly German Luftwaffe's bombing raids, which were wreaking havoc in Birmingham, their hometown. They had their dogs with them and were hoping to supplement their family's meager meat ration with a poached rabbit or 2. After a while, Bob Farmer spotted a WYCH elm named for its strange appearance and decided to climb it, hoping to find a bird's nest. He clambered up and peeked down into the hollow trunk. A glimmer of white convinced him that he had hit the jackpot. However, the object lodged in the middle of the tree was not a bird's nest. Bob pulled it out and found himself staring at a skull, whose empty eye sockets seemed to stare right back at him. At first he thought that the skull was that of an animal, until he noticed clumps of what looked like human hair clinging to it, and crooked teeth protruding from its mouth. The boys fled the woods, promising each other never to tell a soul about what they had found, for fear of getting into trouble. The woman in the tree. Despite the promise they had made, the seriousness of their find weighed heavily on 17-year-old Tom Willits. Shortly after he returned home, he told his parents about what he and his friends had found in Hagley Woods, and they alerted the police. The area was soon cordoned off. Inside the ominous-looking tree, they found a woman's skeleton. Disturbingly, her hand was missing. The bones were discovered scattered around the tree. A cheap, imitation old ring and size 5.5 crepe-soled shoes were also found a short distance away. Scraps of poor quality clothing hung from the bones, and a piece of taffeta fabric was stuffed inside the mouth of the skull, indicating that the victim had been suffocated. The medical examiner Professor James Webster concluded that the woman was around 35 years old, had irregular teeth in her upper jaw, had light brown hair, and was just 5 feet, 1.52 meters, tall. He also determined that the woman had given birth to one child in her lifetime, and estimated that she had been dead for around 18 months. October 1941 / the estimated time of death for the woman's skeleton discovered in the WYCH elm. Professor Webster's findings made him certain that the death of this unknown woman was murder, stating, "I cannot imagine a woman." Unknown woman was murder, stating, "I cannot imagine a woman accidentally slipping in there, neither do I think it reasonable for a woman to crawl into that place to commit suicide." He also concluded that the woman had been placed inside the hollow trunk before rigor mortis, the stiffening of the muscles following death, had set in. Otherwise the body would have been too stiff to fit inside the narrow tree trunk. Professor Webster also maintained that the victim would most likely have been killed close to the spot where she was found, otherwise the killer would not have been able to transport her body to the tree before rigor mortis set in. It was an excellent place for the concealment of a murder, and I think it indicates local knowledge. Medical examiner Prof. James Webster. Following the discovery in the WYCH elm, Worcestershire police contacted every dentist in the area, hoping that one of them would recognize the woman's distinctive protruding teeth. They also trawled through piles of missing persons reports to see if any of them matched the description of the deceased. Neither line of inquiry turned up any leads. The investigation then turned toward the personal effects found at the scene. The crepe-soled shoes were traced to the Waterfoot Company, Lancashire, and investigators were able to find the owners of all but 6 pairs, which had been sold from a market stall in Dudley, a town approximately 11 miles, 18 kilometers, from Birmingham. Mysterious messages. The complexity of the investigation caused the trail to become colder with each passing week. The numerous tragedies of war soon distracted public and police attention from the tree murder riddle. The woman remained unidentified, and the case was quietly forgotten about. Then remained unidentified, and the case was quietly forgotten about. Then, about 6 months later, mysterious graffiti began to appear in the area. Christmas 1943 / the first graffiti message appears. The first message written in chalk on the side of a house in nearby Old Hill read, "Who put Louisbella down the WYCH elm?" This was the first time that a name had been connected to the deceased woman. Over the ensuing months, similar messages appeared, all written by the same hand. Gradually, they took on the same word form, "Who put Bella in the WYCH elm?" The graffiti rang with the implication that somebody knew who killed Bella, but appeals by police to find the artist all proved unsuccessful. In the late 1940s, new messages started to appear, asking the same question. Was this a clue or a taunt? The case became a whodunit that gripped the nation. The combination of the mysterious messages and the lack of an identity for the victim prompted some fanciful theories. Dark magic. One notion that surfaced early on in the investigation was that Bella could have been the victim of a black magic ritual. According to anthropologist Professor Margaret Murray, the fact that Bella's hand was severed from her arm and the bones scattered bore similarities to an occult ceremony known as the Hand of Glory. She also concluded that the murder was somehow connected to another case potentially involving witchcraft, the murder of Charles Walton, who was stabbed and pinned to the ground with his own pitchfork in the nearby village of Lower Quinton. Developing the theory that witchcraft was involved, it was noted that the plant, belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade, and witch hazel are both widely associated with the occult and, according to local legend, so is Hagley Woods. The fact that Bella was entombed inside a tree rather than being buried was also indicative of a ritualistic slaying, according to Professor Murray. The theory that Bella was executed for some crime against a coven quickly gathered steam and remains a favorite theory even today. Investigators working on the case. Remains a favorite theory even today. Investigators working on the case, however, dismissed the theory, declaring that the bones from Bella's hand had simply been scattered by animal predation. Bella the spy. During World War II, several German spies were captured in the UK. As a result, in 1953, the case of Bella and the WYCH-Elm attracted a new line of inquiry: war espionage. The Wolverhampton Express and Star received a letter from somebody who identified herself only as Anna of Claverley. She claimed to have information on the identity of Bella and was interviewed by journalist Wilfred Byford Jones. According to Anna, Bella was a member of a spy ring seeking information about the location of local munitions factories that could then be targeted by the Luftwaffe. Anna was later identified as Una Mossop, and she alleged that her RAF pilot husband, Jack Mossop, had witnessed Bella's death. She said that Mossop told her that he had become involved in a spy ring along with a Dutchman called Van Ralt. One evening, Van Ralt, accompanied by a woman Mossop believed to be Bella, had picked up Mossop in his car. Shortly after, Van Ralt strangled the woman, allegedly because of her spy associations. Another version of the story claims that Jack Mossop and Van Ralt had been drinking with Bella in a local pub when she became drunk and passed out. The two men then placed the woman in the tree to teach her a lesson. When she awoke, she was unable to climb out and perished. However, this theory doesn't explain the discovery of the taffeta stuffed inside her mouth. Whichever version was reported to the newspaper has become obscured by time, but what is known is that Jack Mossop died in St. George's Hospital, Stafford, before Bella's body was discovered. Allegedly, recurring nightmares of Bella's skull stuffed inside the tree ultimately led to his mental breakdown. Van Ralt was never found, and investigators considered Mossop's testimony to be nothing more than hearsay from an estranged wife, told 12 years after the discovery of Bella. In later years, declassified MI5 files gave some weight to the spy theory. The files revealed information concerning a German spy named Joseph Jacobs, who was captured after breaking his ankle while parachuting into Cambridgeshire in 1941. One after Jacobs' arrest, a creased photograph of the glamorous German actress and cabaret singer, Clara Bauerl, was found in his pocket. Jacobs told his interrogators that Bauerl was his lover and that the Third Reich had recruited her as a spy. According to Jacobs, Bowral had parachuted into the West Midlands in 1941 and disappeared. Could Bowral have been the woman Una Mossop had mentioned? Joseph Jacobs was never able to shed any more light into Bowral's fate as he was executed by firing squad in August 1941. However, it is certain that Clara Bowral could not have been Bella, for the simple reason that Bowral was tall, around 5 feet 10 inches, 1.78 meters, whereas Bella was only 5 feet, 1.52 meters, in height. In addition, in 2016, it was discovered that Clara Bowral had died in a Berlin hospital in December 1942. Lost to time. Alongside all of these imaginative theories, there was speculation that Bella may have been someone with a transient lifestyle, a person not easily traced in life and thus not particularly missed in death. In August 2014, BBC Radio 4 broadcast a program too that suggested that Bella was a prostitute who worked the streets around Hagley Road. According to police files, Bella had disappeared in 1941, which would fit the timeline of events. Locals pointed out the fact that gypsies had camped out in the vicinity of Hagley Woods during 1941. Perhaps Bella was one of them, and had been killed by a member of her own community. Yet another suggestion was that Bella was a local barmaid who had been killed by an American GI. With no concrete evidence to support them, these various theories ultimately led nowhere. One straightforward and perhaps most probable hypothesis is that Bella was a homeless woman with no loved ones to report her missing. Quite simply, she may have been a woman who just fell through the cracks. As the decades passed, the mystery continued to grow. The sinister. As the decades passed, the mystery continued to grow. The sinister-looking tree, the severed hand, and whispers of witchcraft and espionage have combined to weave this tragic tale of an anonymous woman's murder into a darkly fascinating legend. Case notes. In July 1941, a businessman and a schoolteacher had both reported hearing a woman's scream coming from Hagley Woods. Police searched the area but found nothing. The police checked more than 3,000 missing persons files. The most well-known piece of graffiti appeared on the 200-year-old Wickberry obelisk at Hagley Hall. Some versions of the graffiti say, "Who put Bella in the wych elm?" 74-year-old Charles Walton was killed in 1945. It is the longest unsolved murder in Warwickshire's police records. Joseph Jacobs was convicted of espionage under the Treachery Act 1940. He was the last man to be executed at the Tower of London. In 2018, a team from Liverpool John Moores University used photographs of Bella's skull to create a digital impression of how she may have looked while still alive. Ninth case. Death of a dreamer. She longed to become an actress, a Hollywood star. However, a very different sort of fame lay in store for the pretty, raven-haired girl, universally remembered in the history of crime as the Black Dahlia. The morning of January 15, 1947, was dreary and chilly when Los Angeles housewife Betty Berzinger set off for a shoe repair store with her 3-year-old daughter, Anne. On South Norton Avenue, they passed eerie, abandoned lots, overgrown with brush and weeds. Something white caught Betty's eye. At first she thought it was a tossed-aside mannequin, discarded perhaps because it was broken in half. Then she realized the two halves were the body of a woman. "I was terribly shocked and scared to death," Betty later told a reporter. Once she grabbed her daughter and rushed to the first house that had a phone. The woman that Betty and her daughter discovered would quickly become a household name as newspapers across the country detailed every twist and turn in the search for her elusive killer. Her name was Elizabeth Short, a young woman who had gone to California hoping for stardom only to achieve it after her gruesome death. It was those two elements, the glamorous Hollywood dreams and the lurid details of Elizabeth's murder, that catapulted the case into the public's consciousness like few others before it. The young woman had been sliced carefully in half, drained of her blood, and then posed in a bizarre spread eagle display among the weeds. Rope marks scarred her ankles, wrists, and throat, and police believed that she had been hung upside down by her feet and tortured for hours before her death. Her mouth had also been slashed into a grotesque, too wide smile. As the Los Angeles Times reported, the victim of one of the city's most brutal killings, according to veteran detectives, the attractive brunette could have died from head wounds, a deep stab wound in the abdomen, frenzied slashings in the back, or from strangulation, investigators said. Jagged knife wounds also were found on the breasts and the left leg, and running from the mouth across the face. 2. Those who knew her could not imagine how this became the fate of the girl they affectionately called Beth or Bet. Elizabeth Short was born in Hyde Park, Massachusetts, in July 1924, to Phoebe May Sawyer and Cleo Short. Even as a child, she stood out with her raven hair and gray-green eyes. Her small nose was slightly upturned. The only physical flaws noted in death were a few surgical scars, chewed fingernails, and bad lower teeth. She always wanted to be an actress, said Phoebe the week after Elizabeth's death. She was ambitious and beautiful and full of life, but she had her moments of despondency. Sometimes she would be gay and carefree, then in the depths of despair. 3 such swings are not unusual for some young women, but Elizabeth's early home life was troubled. Her father lost most of his life savings in the 1929 market crash and abandoned his family the following year. Phoebe was left to raise her 5 daughters alone. The fatherless family moved to Medford, Massachusetts, where Phoebe worked as a bookkeeper. Elizabeth struggled with asthma and recurring bronchitis, and a suggestion to move to a more hospitable climate led her to happily drop out of high school in 1943 and head to California to pursue her acting dreams. She stayed for a few months with her father in Vallejo, California, but the reunion was not happy. He claimed that she would not stay home, so I told her to go her way, I'd go mine. He never spoke to her again. 4. By 1947, 22-year-old Elizabeth had made something of a home in San Diego. She appeared occasionally as a movie extra and auditioned for acting jobs whenever she could. She loved to see, and be seen, in the movie colony spotlights, one friend said. Her roommates and friends told police that she had several suitors. Media frenzy. The media frenzy that engulfed Elizabeth's death cannot be understated. Her face was featured time and again on the front pages of newspapers across the country. The case itself took on a life of its own, said Los Angeles Police Detective Brian Carr, who oversaw the case between 2000 and 2009. 5 reporters soon began calling Elizabeth the Black Dahlia, a sensational moniker bestowed in part as a nod to the then popular movie The Blue Dahlia, and because of her dark hair and fondness for black clothing. It was front-page news in all the local papers every day. Los Angeles Police Detective Brian Carr. Every development in the case, no matter how fruitless, seemed to warrant breathless coverage. When Elizabeth's friends said she had bragged about being friends with the famous actress and Todd, the wire service United Press International announced that police would question the British star. Todd told police she had never met the slain starlet. One suspect after another was arrested, each getting a guilty man's treatment for a day. 25-year-old Robert Red Manley, a married salesman, had been dating Elizabeth and, according to her roommates, had threatened her. He had driven her from San Diego to Los Angeles a week before her death. January 9, 1947. Robert Manley is the last known person to see Elizabeth Short alive. Newspapers nationwide ran a photo of Manley taking a polygraph lie detector test. 29-year-old Army CPL Joseph Dumas was also said to have been dating Elizabeth shortly before her death. Interest in him was piqued because he said that he blacked out after their date and had no memory of what happened to her. Both leads fell apart when each man provided alibis that checked out. Having drawn a blank so far, police shifted focus to the women in Elizabeth's life. Could the killer have been the girlfriend or wife of one of Elizabeth's lovers? Indeed, Elizabeth's sex life was the undercurrent in many stories, with reporters and officials alike dwelling on the tawdry subject and passing judgment. The averages may have caught up with Beth Short. She may have picked up one man too many, was the observation of police psychiatrist Dr. Paul DeRiver. 7. The killer then reached out to the police, sending a letter created from words and letters cut from various newspapers and magazines. The creepy correspondence read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings." Enclosed were Elizabeth's birth certificate, her address book, and other personal papers. A few days later, more of her belongings, a shoe and a bag, were found in a trash dump. The killer sent a letter to the Examiner, telling police where he would turn himself in. However, he never showed up. He then sent another letter, "Have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified." 8. Strangely, several innocent people, both men and women, did turn themselves in. By 1996, police had fielded about 500 such confessions. The bellhop. In January 1949, a bellhop named Leslie Dillon contacted Dr. DeRiver, saying he wanted to discuss the murder for a book he hoped to write. DeRiver immediately grew suspicious. Dillon had previously worked as a mortician's assistant, meaning he knew how to drain blood from a body, as had been done with Elizabeth's corpse, and without prompting, Dillon revealed details of the crime which police have never been able to explain, said LAPD Detective Lt. Harry Hansen. 9. After questioning, Dillon implicated his friend Jeff Connors, who police interviewed but released. Investigators refocused on Dillon, and he was set to appear in late 1949 before a grand jury, but the case was dismissed when a judge ruled that Dillon had been illegally detained. In 2017, British author Piu Eatwell presented a theory that Dillon had orchestrated the Black Dahlia murder with his friend Connors and Mark Hansen, a local nightclub and movie theater owner. Hansen was known to frequently bed chorus girls and wannabe actresses, despite being married. He was linked to Elizabeth because he had given her a place to stay in the months before her death. Eatwell suggested that Hansen had connections within the police department, connections that had enabled the trio to get away with murder. 10. Sins of the father. More than 70 years after the crime, investigators continue to wade through countless theories. Most can be discounted, but one of the most intriguing comes from a former homicide detective who claims to have figured out the killer's identity, his own father. Los Angeles Police Department veteran Steve Hodel began suspecting his father, a respected Los Angeles doctor, after his stepmother gave him a small photo album that belonged to the elder Hodel after his death. in 1999. The book, which measured 3 inches, 7.6 centimeters, square, contained black and white photographs, many of which Steve Hodel recognized. Then he came upon 2 images of a black-haired woman he did not know. After painstakingly comparing facial contours and counting freckles, Steve Hodel became convinced the photos were of the infamous Black Dahlia. "I loved my father and respected him," Steve Hodel told an Associated Press reporter in 2003. "His blood flows through my body. He gave me being. But now I have come to look at my father as the true Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde." 11. Hodel laid out his suspicions in a best-selling book, Black Dahlia Avenger, A Genius for Murder. 12. According to case files released 50 years after the slaying, Dr. George Hodel was indeed a suspect in Elizabeth's murder. Police electronically surveilled his home for 3 weeks in 1950. Soon after, the Black Dahlia case was mentioned in court when Hodel was tried for committing incest with his daughter. He was acquitted of the charge. Transcripts of overheard conversations included Hodel saying, "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." At another point, Hodel also suggested he might have killed his secretary. Why police didn't pursue Hodel is unclear. Officials have repeatedly declined to comment because the Black Dahlia investigation, while ice cold, is still technically open. "I don't have the time to either prove or disprove Hodel's investigation," said LAPD Det. Brian Carr in a 2006 episode of the television series Cold Case Files. "I am too busy working on active cases." The list grows. Hodel was not the first to accuse his own father of being the infamous killer. In 1995, a woman named Janice Knowlton released a book called "Daddy Was the Black Dahlia Killer." She said that her deceased father, George, not only killed Elizabeth, but that she had witnessed the murder. As a 10-year-old child, she claimed she had been brought to Elizabeth's house during her father's affair with the raven-haired starlet, and that police documents indicating that they had sought a man named George as a suspect further implicated her father. Another doctor was put forward as a possible suspect. Larry Harnish, a Los Angeles Times copy editor, suggested that a man named Walter Bailey could have been the killer. Bailey was a surgeon who, until he left his wife some 4 months before the murder, had lived 1 block from the lot in which Elizabeth's body was dumped. Harnish became convinced Bailey was a viable suspect after learning that one of the doctor's daughters was good friends with Elizabeth's sister, Virginia. According to Harnish, Bailey left his wife for another woman, a fellow doctor named Alexandra von Perdica. Alexandra allegedly ended up blackmailing the doctor because she knew a secret about him, possibly that he was the Black Dahlia killer. According to one of the countless websites dedicated to tracking the case, at least 8 men are still labeled people of interest in one fashion or another. They include Los Angeles Times publisher Norman Chandler, who some allege had dated Elizabeth, a medical doctor named Patrick O'Reilly who allegedly met Elizabeth through nightclub owner Mark Hansen and who was once convicted of sexual assault against his secretary, and an unidentified, dark-haired man pictured with Elizabeth in an undated photo found in the trunk of her car. With today's advances in forensic science, it is feasible that evidence in Elizabeth's case could have been tested to get a solid new lead and find the killer once and for all. However, that is no longer possible. Over the killer once and for all. However, that is no longer possible. Over the years, physical evidence in one of the highest profile cases in California. History has gone missing. Unless it is somehow recovered, the Black Dahlia mystery is destined to endure. Case notes. Police suspected that the killer might be a doctor because the bisection was so precise. Before her death, Elizabeth had been working as a waitress. Elizabeth's mother told reporters that her daughter wrote to her at least once a week. Cleo supposedly abandoned his car near a bridge, causing many to believe he had committed suicide. Elizabeth attended the Methodist Church in Medford. When Elizabeth's father learned of her murder, he told police, "I want nothing to do with this." Elizabeth was set to marry U.S. Air Force Major Matthew Michael Gordon, but he died in an airplane crash in 1945. The first reference to the nickname appeared 2 days after the discovery of the body. An article credited her boyfriends with giving her this moniker. Elizabeth was arrested for underage drinking in Santa Barbara in September 1943. Her fingerprints were taken, enabling police to quickly identify her body. Police interviewed more than 150 suspects, but none were charged. Sightings of Elizabeth in the days prior to her murder all proved false. Her movements between January 9th and the discovery of her body are a mystery. A 15-year-old girl named Lynn Martin, who'd once roomed with Elizabeth, didn't provide much insight, but she did help sell newspapers. The caption with her photo called her shapely and mature looking. Several of those making false confessions were charged with obstruction of justice. The police described Leslie Dillon as their best suspect yet. An address book bearing Mark Hansen's name was found among Elizabeth's possessions. After Knowlton died in 2004, her stepsister insisted that her memories were faulty and her book was trash. Some commentators have linked the Black Dahlia case with the Cleveland torso murders of the 1930s. A 38-year-old cowboy named Edward Glenthorpe supposedly had blood in his car and had mumbled about cutting up a girl while on a bus. 10th cause. Did Sam do it? Dr. Sam Shepard and his wife, Marilyn, seemed to have an ideal home and marriage until a savage murder revealed the dark undercurrents in their perfect life. The murder of Marilyn Shepard and the subsequent trial of her prosperous, good-looking doctor husband has cast a long shadow. The novelist Ernest Hemingway wrote, "A trial like this, with its elements of doubt, is the greatest human story of all. This is the real thing. This trial has everything the public clamors for." As day broke on July 4, 1954, Marilyn Shepard was bludgeoned to death with an unknown instrument in the bedroom of the couple's idyllic home. With her husband the prime suspect, the shocking murder led to one of the longest and most controversial murder investigations and trials in American legal history. A perfect evening. Osteopath Dr. Sam Shepard lived in a 2-story, Dutch colonial home in the leafy suburb of Bay Village, Ohio, overlooking Lake Erie. His wife, Marilyn, was a Sunday school teacher, and they had a young son, Samuel, nicknamed Chip. Marilyn was 4 months pregnant with their second child. On the evening of July 3, 1954, Sam and Marilyn were entertaining neighbors. They ate dinner together before watching the sunset over Lake Erie's still waters. At dusk, they went indoors to watch the 1945 movie Strange Holiday. Dr. Shepard, exhausted from a busy day at his surgical practice, later dozed off in a daybed in the living room. The neighbors left around midnight, and Marilyn went upstairs to their bedroom, leaving her husband asleep. She removed her nail polish and went to bed, leaving the bedside light on in case Shepard woke up and came upstairs. When her husband was working late, Marilyn would often leave the light on for his late-night return. What happened next has baffled the world for more than half a decade. Intruder terror. According to Shepard, he was awoken at approximately 4 a.m. by Marilyn screaming his name. He added, "It wasn't actually a scream. I can't really explain it." He said that he ran upstairs to the bedroom, where he grappled with a white form before being struck on the back of the head and knocked out. When Shepard regained his senses, he heard noises downstairs. He rushed to where the noise was coming from and discovered a bushy-haired man running away from the house. He pursued this intruder through the garden and down to the shores of the lake, where a struggle ensued. During this altercation, Shepard was knocked unconscious once again. When he came to, the man was gone. Shepard ran back to the house to check on his wife and son, relieved to find that Chip was sleeping soundly and had been seemingly undisturbed through the entire ordeal. However, when Shepard entered his and Marilyn's bedroom, he found the body of his wife sprawled on the bed, her brown hair matted in a puddle of her own blood. She had been attacked with such force and hit repeatedly, later estimated to be between 27 and 35 times, that the bones below her eye and around her mouth were detached from her face. Her nose was broken, 2 teeth were missing, and a nail on her left hand had been torn away, presumably when she was desperately trying to defend herself against her attacker. Her pajama top was lifted up above her breasts, and her underwear had been removed and was dangling from her right leg. The bedroom walls were spattered with blood. As news of the gruesome murder made headlines across the country, Leo Stoicki, a neighbor of the Shepards, contacted police to inform them that he had spotted a strange man near the Shepards' home in the early hours of the day that Marilyn was killed. He said he spotted the man as he was returning from a fishing trip in Sandusky at around 2:30 a.m. As his headlights illuminated the road, Leo saw him standing by the side of the road in front of the Shepards' house. He described the man as tall, bushy-haired, and wearing a white shirt. This description matched the one given by Sam of the man he had fought with in the bedroom and later on the shorefront. 2 more witnesses, Richard and Betty Knitter. Later on the shorefront, 2 more witnesses, Richard and Betty Knitter, would later testify that they had also seen a man with bushy hair outside the Shepard home at around 3 a.m. He had a terrified look on his face, Richard said. Nevertheless, the police soon announced that they had essentially ruled out any theory of a casual intruder. Although a doctor had concluded that Dr. Shepard couldn't have inflicted the wounds he sustained on himself, investigators now suspected that he had fabricated the story of the fracas with an intruder and had killed his wife himself. The Shepard's son had remained asleep next door during the entire attack, and it seemed that the family dog, Coco, remained silent throughout the night. Trial by newspaper. To make matters worse for Shepard, conservative Cleveland was shocked by revelations that his marriage was not as happy as it at first appeared, and that the doctor had had at least one extramarital affair, which he initially denied. Newspapers began to run headlines such as, "Why isn't Sam Shepard in jail?" 1. 2 weeks after Marilyn's murder, Dr. Shepard was arrested, and the first trial began in Ohio on October 18, 1954. Newspapers and TV stations covered it extensively. The judge, Edward J. Blyden, admitted to one newspaper columnist his belief that Dr. Shepard was guilty as hell before any evidence was even presented. The upper-class lifestyle of the Shepards added an element of glamour to the already sensational trial. It was to the 1950s what the O.J. Simpson trial would become to the 1990s. December 21, 1954 / Dr. Shepard is convicted of murder but proclaims his innocence to the court. During the trial, the prosecution claimed that there were no signs of forced entry to the house. A report listing a damaged door in the basement was not disclosed. Trauma expert Dr. William Fallon described Shepard's serious neck injuries as almost impossible to self-inflict, owing to the position and severity of them. He had a fracture of the vertebrae, as well as swelling at the bottom of the skull. Despite the fact, vertebrae, as well as swelling at the bottom of the skull. Despite the fact that the prosecution's case against Dr. Shepard was entirely circumstantial, he was convicted of second-degree murder. Some might say that he was accused of murder but convicted of adultery. However, Shepard's conviction was not the end of the story. Interest in the case revived in 1957 when a convict named Donald J. Welder confessed to the murder. Police dismissed his claim as fantasy. Nevertheless, Shepard's legal team continued to make numerous appeals. Shepard was finally released on bond in 1964, after serving 9 years. On June 6, 1966, the Supreme Court overturned the conviction. Lambasting the carnival atmosphere of the original trial, the court ruled that the judge had failed to shield jurors and witnesses from the biased media circus surrounding the case. Back in court, a new trial was ordered, beginning on October 24, 1966. Expert Dr. Paul Leland Kirk testified that Marilyn was murdered by a left-handed killer. Shepard was right-handed. The court did not find Shepard guilty, but neither did it declare him innocent. When Shepard was released, the rules under which the press could report criminal trials in the U.S. were rewritten to prevent another trial by newspaper ever happening again. Dr. Sam Shepard wrote a book about the case, published in 1966, titled Endure and Conquer, My 12-Year Fight for Vindication. The teaser page bore the heading Did Sam Do It? 2. April 13, 2000 / the jury delivers its verdict in a civil suit brought by Shepard's son, Samuel. In 2000, a civil case was filed by Shepard's son, Samuel Reese Shepard, in an attempt to clear his father's name. By this point, Dr. Shepard had been deceased for 30 years, but his son was determined to have him posthumously declared innocent. If the state of Ohio declared Dr. Shepard innocent, then Samuel could have sued the state for the wrongful conviction of his father. Over the 10-week trial, 76 witnesses were called and hundreds of exhibits were displayed. The bushy-haired man. During the 2000 trial, plaintiff attorney Terry Gilbert offered another suspect for the murder, Richard Eberlin. The owner of Dick's Cleaning Services, Eberlin was regularly hired by the Shepards to wash their windows. He suffered from seizures and temper tantrums and was often caught lying and stealing. He started to lose his hair as a young adult, prompting him to wear hair pieces. In addition, Eberlin had been convicted in 1989 of killing Ethel May Durkin, an elderly widow, as part of a fraudulent scheme to collect on her will. Eberlin was first connected to the murder of Marilyn Shepard in 1959, when he was arrested for a string of robberies on Cleveland's west side. Many of the houses that he targeted belonged to his window cleaning clients, and tens of thousands of dollars worth of items were stolen. One piece of particular interest to police was a diamond ring, which Eberlin kept apart from the other items he accumulated. This ring once belonged to Marilyn Shepard. Eberlin claimed that he had stolen it from Dr. Shepard's brother's home, where he found a box marked property of Marilyn Shepard. Eberlin went on to tell police that just days before Marilyn's murder, he had cut his finger while changing storm windows and that he had dripped blood throughout the Shepherd's home. Was he anticipating the need for an alibi? In February 1997, DNA in the blood found on the stairs, as well as semen found on Marilyn, was consistent with Eberling's DNA. This DNA type was shared by approximately 5% of the population. Bay Village police had wanted to pursue him as a suspect at the time, but Cuyahoga County Prosecutor John T. Corrigan and Coroner Samuel R. Gerber considered the case closed. Adding more weight to the evidence against Eberling, Robert Lee Parks, a convicted robber who was incarcerated with Eberling, told police that Eberling had confessed that he killed Marilyn and that everything Dr. Shepherd had said about the bushy-haired intruder was true. Eberling allegedly told Parks that he had gone to the Shepherds' home to rob it and to rape Marilyn, thinking that Dr. Shepherd was working late. He also admitted that he was wearing a bushy-haired wig. Working late. He also admitted that he was wearing a bushy-haired wig and makeup. Eberling apparently killed Marilyn when she bit him and screamed for help while he raped her. Even though no blood in the house matched the DNA profile of Dr. Shepherd and instead matched Eberling, who was also found in possession of Marilyn's ring, the jury sided with county prosecutors and declared that they could not find Dr. Shepherd posthumously innocent of his wife's murder. Further suspicions. While Dr. Shepherd and Richard Eberling remain the two main suspects, former FBI agent Bernard Connors, in his book Tailspin, The Strange Case of Major Call, contends that Air Force Maj. James Lone Call killed Marilyn during a cross-country crime spree, which ended in a deadly shootout with police in Lake Placid, New York. Connors points to a bite wound on Call's hand, which he believes was inflicted by Marilyn during their struggle. Connors also believes that the murder weapon was a crowbar found in Call's possession. F. Lee Bailey, the lawyer who won Dr. Shepherd's second acquittal, presented Spencer and Esther Houck, neighbors of the Shepherds, as suspects. The motivation, he claimed, was that Esther caught her husband and Marilyn having an affair and killed Marilyn in a fit of rage. Bailey's theory was presented to a grand jury, but they decided against indicting the Houcks, who had been dead for years. The murder of Marilyn Shepherd gave rise to many books, inspired a hit 1960s TV series and a 1993 movie, both called The Fugitive, and led to a precedent-setting Supreme Court decision on the effects of pretrial publicity, ensuring the case a prominent place in popular culture and legal history. The trial of the century never proved who killed Marilyn Shepherd, leaving the case still unsolved. Following Shepherd's release, many still considered him guilty. He lived under a cloud of suspicion and was barred from the medical profession. He fell into a haze of alcohol and drugs, and died in 1970 at the age of just 46. The cause of death was liver failure. His son, however, said the true cause was a broken heart and a spirit that found no solace. Case notes. Dr. Shepherd had no open wounds when he was examined by a doctor following the murder. Marilyn Shepherd's front teeth had been snapped off at the gum during the attack, indicating that she may have bitten her killer. Police found Sam's desk drawers pulled open, but no items were missing. Sam's doctor's bag was also overturned, but again, nothing was missing. Investigators noted that sports trophies belonging to both Sam and Marilyn had been damaged. However, this could have been done before the day of the murder. The other woman in Shepherd's life was medical technician Susan Hayes. She testified that Shepherd loved Marilyn but not as a wife and was contemplating a divorce. A damaged flashlight that could have been the murder weapon was found in Lake Erie. There was no evidence that Shepard had ever physically abused his wife in the past. Sam married German divorcee Ariane Ben Johans 3 days after he was released from prison. They divorced in 1969, and he married a woman named Colleen Strickland that same year. Eberlin had had a difficult upbringing, having been in and out of 5 foster homes. By the age of 7, there was speculation that Eberlin was involved in his foster father's death in 1946, when he was just 16 years old. Eberlin said that he had lunch with Marilyn Shepard in her home 2 days before her murder. He called her a lovely, lovely lady. Blood was found on a closet door in Marilyn's bedroom. During the civil trial, Adna expert said he was 90% sure one spatter belonged to Richard Eberlin, but this evidence was not admissible. Blood from a third person was found on the pants Dr. Shepard was wearing at the time of the murder. It has never been identified. Eberlin died in jail in 1998 without ever admitting any involvement in Marilyn Shepard's murder. Esther Houck and J. Spencer Houck were first on the scene when Marilyn was killed. After failing to re-enter the medical profession, Shepard became a professional wrestler under the name of Killer Sam Shepard.